Hello and welcome to Nightmare Lullabies. As you settle in for the night, prepare to be immersed in a world of eerie whispers and unsettling tales, designed to both chill and soothe. Now close your eyes, relax, and let the darkness carry you away. And if these nightly tales captivate you, feel free to join our community for more whispered secrets. Lysandra had never been the type to take social media too seriously. Snapchat was just another app to her, a way to share glimpses of her daily life with her friends. She wasn't an influencer, she wasn't chasing likes, and she certainly wasn't the type to attract attention from strangers. So when she first noticed a strange username viewing her stories, she brushed it off. It started subtly. Every time she posted something, her morning matcha latte, her Bengal cat Rune curled up on the windowsill, a quick selfie before heading to work, she noticed that one account was always the first to view it. No face snap. She tapped on the name. No profile picture, no Bitmoji, no mutual friends, and no snap score. The account seemed completely blank. She frowned. Probably just a bot, she told herself, and moved on. But it didn't stop. Days passed, and every time she posted, no face snap was the first to view her story. No messages, no friend requests, just silent, persistent watching. At first, she found it a little strange, but harmless. Maybe it was someone from work who didn't want to reveal their identity? Maybe a quiet admirer? She mentioned it to Everin, her best friend, over coffee one afternoon. "That's creepy," he said, stirring his espresso. "You sure you don't know them?" "Positive. I even checked mutuals." "Nothing." Everin leaned back, tapping his fingers on the table. "Just block them." "I might," she said, but for some reason she hesitated. That night, after a particularly long shift at the cafe, Lysandra got home, flopped onto her bed, and snapped a quick selfie with the caption, "Finally home." Exhausted. Minutes later, a new notification popped up. "No face snap viewed your story." Her stomach twisted slightly. It was nearly midnight. Why did they always view her story first? Why so fast? Was it really just a bot? She hesitated, then clicked on their profile again. Still nothing. No details, no interactions. Just the eerie presence lurking in her viewer list. With a sigh, she put her phone on her nightstand and turned over in bed. She was too tired to think about it. As she drifted off, the faint hum of notifications buzzing on her phone barely registered in her mind. It wasn't until morning that she noticed them. 30 messages. From no face snap. Lysandra's breath hitched as she tapped the notification. Her inbox was flooded with images. Distorted, pixelated, dark, and all of them were of her. One of her sitting in the cafe, wiping down a table. One of her walking home the night before. One of her asleep in her bed. Her stomach turned, nausea creeping up her throat. These weren't pictures she had taken. They were taken of her. From somewhere close. Too close. Her hands trembled as she dropped the phone onto her bed. Her mind raced. How? When? Who? Her apartment was locked. She lived alone. No one else had her keys. Heart pounding, she forced herself to breathe. This had to be a joke. A sick prank. Maybe one of her friends messing with her? No. No one she knew would go this far. She grabbed her phone again, fingers shaking as she tapped on Everin's name. The call barely rang before he picked up. "Liz, what's wrong?" "I think someone's watching me." A long silence. Then, his voice steady but serious. "I'm coming over." She nodded, even though he couldn't see her, gripping her phone as if it were the only thing tethering her to reality. Her mind screamed at her to delete the app, to shut her phone off, to do something. But she couldn't, because in the pit of her stomach, she had the horrible feeling that no matter what she did, no face snap would still be watching. And this was only the beginning. Lysandra barely moved from her couch as she waited for Everin to arrive. The weight of her phone felt suffocating in her hands, her fingers clenching and unclenching around the device. Every time she considered turning it off, some irrational part of her feared that doing so would make things worse, as if ignoring it would provoke whatever presence was behind the account. A knock at the door made her jump. She hurried over, unlocking it with shaking hands. Everin stood on the other side, a concerned expression shadowing his face. He stepped inside immediately, closing the door behind him. "Tell me everything," he said, his voice low. Lysandra swallowed. "It started with a username. No face snap. It kept viewing my stories first, every single time. I thought it was a bot at first. But last night I blocked the account, and this morning I woke up to 30 messages. All pictures of me. Evren's jaw tightened. What kind of pictures? Of me at work. Of me walking home. Of me sleeping. Her voice wavered at the last word. Evren's expression darkened, his fingers gripping the strap of his bag, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Liz, someone's watching you. She exhaled sharply, forcing herself not to panic again. I know, but I don't know how. My windows are always locked. My door was bolted when I got home last night. Evren ran a hand through his hair. It has to be someone close by. A neighbor, maybe? Or someone who works near the cafe. I don't know, she admitted, pressing her hands to her temples. I just know I don't feel safe. Evren glanced around the apartment. I'm staying over. Relief flooded through her. Thank you. They spent the next hour checking the apartment. The locks, the windows, even inside her closets. Everything was as it should be. No broken latches, no forced entry. No hidden cameras that they could see. Nothing, Evren muttered, shaking his head. But that doesn't mean you're safe. Lysandra sat on the couch, her arms wrapped around herself. What do I do? Evren sat beside her. First, we need to document everything. Every message, every image. Then we go to the police. Lysandra nodded, trying to steel herself. And if they don't take me seriously, then we figure something else out. She exhaled shakily. Okay, but deep down she knew this was far from over. Something told her that whoever, or whatever, was watching her wasn't going to stop. And she had no idea how far they were willing to go. Lysandra sat motionless on the couch, staring at the screen of her phone. The images were still open, each one darker and more disturbing than the last. Evren stood beside her, his fingers gripping the edge of the coffee table, so tightly his knuckles were white. This is bad, Lys, he said, his voice laced with tension. This isn't just some creepy internet troll messing with you. Someone is actually following you. They know where you live, where you work. They're in your life. She swallowed hard, trying to keep her breathing steady. I don't understand. How could someone get these pictures? I mean, look at this one. She scrolled back to the image of her sleeping. The angle was too high to be from a window, too close to be from outside the apartment. The realization made her stomach turn. They were inside. Evren didn't respond at first. He simply exhaled through his nose, his shoulders visibly tense. Okay, he said finally. We're not staying here tonight. Lysandra looked up at him. What? I don't trust this place. Whoever did this, they have access to your apartment. She shook her head. No, I always lock my doors. The windows too. I would have noticed if they broke in. Evren cut her off. Yeah, but what if they didn't break in? What if they never had to? The silence that followed was suffocating. Her mind raced, trying to come up with an explanation, but nothing made sense. Her landlord? A maintenance worker? But why? And how did they avoid leaving any signs? We need to go to the police, Evren said. Now. Lysandra hesitated. They won't do anything. I've heard too many stories. Unless there's an actual break-in or physical harm, they'll just brush it off as an online harassment case. They need to know about this. We'll demand they take it seriously. She sighed, rubbing her temples. Fine, let's go. The police station was nearly empty when they arrived, the harsh fluorescent lighting casting an eerie glow over the waiting area. The officer at the front desk barely looked up when they approached. We need to report a stalker, Evren said before Lysandra could even find her voice. The officer glanced up, clearly unimpressed. Do you have reason to believe you're in immediate danger? Lysandra wanted to scream. Instead, she forced herself to remain calm. Yes, I've been receiving photos of me. In my home, while I was sleeping. The officer's expression didn't change. He leaned back in his chair. Do you know the person? No, she snapped. That's the problem. Someone has access to my apartment, and I don't know how. Evren pulled out her phone and showed the officer the images. For the first time, the man actually straightened up. His brow furrowed slightly as he scrolled through them. Where did these come from? An anonymous Snapchat account, Evren answered. It started by watching all her stories first. Then, when she blocked it, she started getting these. The officer exhaled through his nose. Snapchat doesn't store metadata the way other platforms do. Makes it harder to track down the sender. Lysandra crossed her arms. So what do I do? Just wait until something worse happens. He pursed his lips. We can file a report, but with no forced entry, no physical threat, there's not much we can do. Rage boiled in her stomach. So that's it? I have to just accept that someone is sneaking into my apartment. I didn't say that, the officer replied, though he didn't sound particularly concerned. We'll add an extra patrol in your area, and you should change your locks. Maybe install a security camera. Lysandra clenched her fists. This wasn't enough. She could see it in Evren's face, too. He was barely holding himself back from shouting. Fine, she bit out. Thanks for nothing. Back at her apartment, Evren paced restlessly while Lysandra sat curled up on the couch, gripping a mug of tea she barely touched. They don't care, she muttered. They won't do anything until it's too late. Evren exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. Then we have to handle this ourselves. She looked up at him. How? Security cameras. One inside, one outside. And we should check for any hidden ones. The thought made her shudder. You really think? I think we can't rule anything out. Lysandra set down her tea and stood up. Fine. Let's start looking. They combed through every inch of the apartment. Under furniture, inside vents, behind picture frames. Every time they moved an object, she half expected to find a blinking red light staring back at her. But they found nothing. No hidden cameras, Evren said finally, which means either they're really good at hiding them, or they're getting in some other way. Lysandra shuddered. I hate this. We're not staying here tonight, Evren repeated firmly. Pack a bag. You're coming to my place. She hesitated. What if they follow us? Evren's jaw clenched. Then we'll catch them. Lysandra spent the night on Evren's couch, but sleep didn't come easily. Every creak of the apartment, every distant sound made her eyes snap open, her heart hammering. Sometime after 3 a.m., her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She flinched before cautiously reaching for it. A new message. From No Face Snap. Her stomach churned as she opened it. It was a video. The screen was dark at first, then flickered. Her heart stopped when she saw what it was. It was footage of her. Sleeping. But not here, at Evren's apartment. It was from her own bedroom. And it had been taken just minutes ago. A cold hand gripped her throat, suffocating her with fear. They knew where she was. They were still watching. Lysandra's fingers trembled as she clutched her phone. Her breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. The video on her screen played in an endless loop, grainy footage of her sleeping, wrapped in blankets, her body rising and falling with each breath. But this wasn't from last night. This was taken just minutes ago, from her own bedroom. But she wasn't in her bedroom. She was at Evren's apartment. They know where I am, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Evren, who had been dozing off in the armchair, snapped awake at the panic in her tone. What? She turned the phone toward him, her eyes wide with terror. Evren leaned forward, his expression darkening as he watched the looped footage. This doesn't make sense, he muttered. We left your apartment hours ago. The doors were locked. The place was empty. Then how did they take this? Lysandra asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Her whole body felt numb. Cold. Evren didn't answer immediately. His jaw tensed, his grip tightening around his own phone. Then he stood abruptly. We're going back. Lysandra recoiled. What? No. Are you crazy? We need answers, Evren said, already grabbing his jacket. If someone's inside your place right now, we need to know how they got in. If we wait too long, they'll be gone. Lysandra wanted to argue, to tell him that going back was the worst possible idea. But deep down, she knew he was right. If they waited, the stalker would slip through their fingers again. She swallowed hard, grabbed her own coat, and followed him out the door. The ride back to her apartment was silent, filled with an unbearable tension. Evren drove with both hands gripping the steering wheel, his eyes darting between the road and the rearview mirror. Lysandra sat stiffly in the passenger seat, her hands clenched into fists in her lap. Her mind raced through possibilities. Was the stalker inside waiting for them? Were there more hidden cameras she hadn't found? And the worst question of all, were they being watched right now? When they pulled into the parking lot of her apartment complex, everything looked normal. No strange cars. No signs of forced entry. The same eerie stillness that had always surrounded the building late at night. Evren cut the engine and turned to her. Stay close to me. If anything feels wrong, we leave immediately. She nodded, gripping her keys so tightly they dug into her palm. Inside, the air felt heavier, colder. The apartment was dark, just as they had left it. But something felt off. Everin moved first, stepping cautiously inside. Lysandra followed, her pulse pounding in her ears. The living room was untouched. The kitchen exactly as they had left it. But the moment they stepped into her bedroom, the temperature seemed to drop even more. Her blankets were pushed aside, as if someone had just been in them. Her closet door, which she always kept shut, was open just an inch. Lysandra's throat tightened. Everin! He followed her gaze, then slowly moved toward the closet. He raised his hand, gripping the handle tightly before yanking it open. Nothing. Empty. Lysandra exhaled shakily, pressing a hand to her chest. Maybe they left already. Everin didn't respond. He was still staring into the closet, his body tense. "What is it?" she asked hesitantly. He knelt down, reaching toward the floor. When he stood up, he was holding something. A phone. Lysandra's stomach dropped. "That's not mine." Everin turned the device over in his hands. The screen was cracked. A few smudges of dirt covered the back. He pressed the power button, and the screen flickered to life. The home screen had no wallpaper, no visible apps, just a single notification. A Snapchat message. From No Face Snap. Everin's jaw clenched. He tapped the notification, opening the message. A video. It began with static, then cut to a blurry image. The camera moved, shaking slightly as if the person holding it was walking. The frame came into focus, and Lysandra felt her blood turn to ice. It was a live view of her and Everin, standing in her bedroom. Right now, her breath hitched. She spun around, scanning the room, the corners, the walls. But there was no one. The camera angle on the screen shifted slightly, the view tilting downward. And then they saw it. The camera was filming from inside the closet. Everin didn't hesitate. He dropped the phone and grabbed Lysandra's hand, yanking her toward the door. "We're leaving. Now." Lysandra didn't argue. She ran, her legs barely keeping up with Everin's as they bolted out of the apartment and into the car. He slammed the door shut, locked it, and started the engine. Neither of them spoke for the first few minutes. Lysandra sat trembling, staring at the phone still clutched in Everin's hand. The screen had gone dark, but she knew what she had seen. The stalker had been inside, watching them, and somehow they had known exactly when to send that message. "Where are we going?" she finally asked, her voice barely audible. Everin's grip on the wheel tightened. "Somewhere safe." Lysandra swallowed hard. "Everin, what if they're following us?" He didn't answer, because in the rearview mirror, 2 headlights flickered on from across the parking lot, and began following them into the night. Everin gripped the steering wheel, so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lysandra sat stiffly beside him, her hands clenched in her lap, her breath shallow. The headlights in the rearview mirror remained steady, trailing their car at a measured distance. "They're following us," she whispered, unable to tear her eyes away from the lights. Everin didn't respond immediately. His eyes darted between the road ahead and the glowing orbs behind them. He exhaled sharply through his nose and pressed his foot down on the accelerator. The car lurched forward, gaining speed as they weaved through the empty streets. The headlights behind them matched their pace. Lysandra's stomach twisted in fear. "What do we do?" Everin's jaw tensed. "We lose them." He took a sharp left onto a dimly lit side street, the tires screeching slightly. Lysandra turned in her seat, watching the car behind them follow without hesitation. Whoever was driving wasn't in a hurry. They were patient, watching, waiting. Everin took another turn, then another, zigzagging through the neighborhood, testing their stalker's persistence. But no matter what he did, the car remained. Always just far enough back to keep them in sight, never too close to be obvious. "They're toying with us," Lysandra muttered, gripping the door handle. "Not for long," Everin growled. He suddenly veered right, speeding onto a freeway entrance. The dark highway stretched before them, the lanes nearly empty at this hour. Everin floored it, pushing past the speed limit. For a moment, the headlights disappeared. Then, the car shot onto the freeway behind them, accelerating fast. Lysandra's pulse pounded in her ears. "They're speeding up. I see that." Everin's voice was clipped, focused. He gritted his teeth and jerked the wheel, shifting into the far left lane before swerving to an off-ramp without signaling. The city streets reappeared as they raced down an industrial road, the looming silhouettes of warehouses and storage buildings casting eerie shadows in the night. Evren suddenly hit the brakes and cut the headlights. The car jerked to a stop in a narrow alley between two abandoned buildings. Lysandra gasped, thrown forward by the sudden deceleration. Her breathing was erratic, her mind racing. Evren killed the engine. They sat in absolute silence, shrouded in darkness. Then they waited. The pursuing car blew past the alleyway, its headlights washing over the street like a searchlight. The tires hummed against the asphalt as it continued forward, oblivious to their hiding spot. Lysandra didn't dare move. She could feel the heat of Evren's body beside her, his breath controlled but tight with tension. Seconds felt like hours as they sat frozen in the small space. The car didn't return. Evren let out a slow exhale, finally shifting in his seat. "I think we lost them." Lysandra swallowed, her throat dry. "For now." Evren turned the key, but before restarting the car, he looked at her. "We can't go back to my place, and we're definitely not going back to yours." Lysandra nodded. "So where do we go?" He hesitated, thinking. Somewhere public. A motel, maybe. Somewhere with cameras and people. She agreed without hesitation. Right now, being surrounded by strangers was preferable to being alone. The motel was cheap, the kind with flickering neon signs and a check-in clerk who barely looked up from his magazine. Evren paid in cash, using a fake name, and took the key without a word. Lysandra followed him up the creaky stairs to the second floor. The hallway smelled of stale air and cigarette smoke. Their room was small, with peeling wallpaper and a dim lamp that buzzed faintly. But it was safe, or at least safer than anywhere else. Evren double-checked the locks on the door. No one saw us come in. We should be good here for the night. Lysandra sat on the bed, hugging her knees to her chest. She felt exhausted, but her mind wouldn't stop racing. Every shadow outside the window felt like a threat. Every creak in the hallway made her stomach tighten. She pulled out her phone, hesitating before opening it. A part of her wanted to shut it off entirely, but she needed to know, needed to check. Her Snapchat notifications were empty. Relief flooded her chest, but it was short-lived. A new dread crept in. "Evren," she murmured, "what if this isn't about Snapchat anymore?" He looked at her, his expression unreadable. "What do you mean?" She met his gaze. "They knew where I was tonight. They followed us. The messages, the videos, they were just the start." Evren didn't speak for a long moment. Then he sat beside her, exhaling heavily. "If that's true, then blocking them won't matter." Lysandra nodded. "And neither will running." Silence settled between them, heavy and oppressive. Evren clenched his jaw, his mind visibly working through the possibilities. Then his phone buzzed. Lysandra stiffened as he pulled it from his pocket. His face darkened as he read the screen. "What?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He turned the screen toward her. "A message. From an unknown number. You can't hide forever." Her stomach turned to ice. She grabbed her phone and quickly checked her own messages. Nothing. But before she could feel relief, another buzz filled the room. This time, Evren's phone vibrated again. Another message. This time it was a picture. A photo of the motel. From outside their window. Lysandra bolted to her feet, heart hammering. She rushed to the window, but when she peered outside, the parking lot was empty. No one was there. The only movement was the flickering motel sign, casting eerie flashes of red and white against the pavement. Evren was already packing their things. "We need to go. Now." Lysandra didn't argue. She grabbed her bag, threw on her jacket, and followed him out the door. The hallway was silent, but her ears buzzed with fear. As they reached the parking lot, she resisted the urge to look over her shoulder. Because she knew, whoever was doing this was still watching. The night air was cold against Lysandra's skin as she and Evren hurried toward his car. Every step felt like a warning, like the world was closing in on them. The parking lot was eerily quiet, the only sound coming from the distant hum of a vending machine flickering near the motel entrance. Evren unlocked the car with a sharp click, and they both slid inside. His hands were firm on the wheel, his knuckles taut with tension. Lysandra couldn't shake the feeling that eyes were on them, watching, waiting. As soon as the engine roared to life, Evren wasted no time peeling out of the parking lot. The neon motel sign disappeared into the darkness behind them. They had nowhere to go, but anywhere was safer than here. Check your phone again, Everin muttered, his gaze locked on the road. Lysandra hesitated before pulling out her phone. The screen was dark, free of notifications. No new messages. No unknown numbers. She exhaled, but the relief was brief. We should be good, she murmured. There's nothing. Everin didn't respond right away. He glanced at his own phone, resting in the console between them. No new messages either. Still, his jaw remained clenched. They knew we were at the motel, he said. And they sent that picture while we were inside. That means they're close. Lysandra swallowed hard, gripping her seatbelt. Then where are they now? Everin's expression darkened. That's what I want to find out. They drove for miles, sticking to back roads and avoiding the freeway. The city lights eventually gave way to the lonely glow of street lamps, casting long shadows over the deserted roads. Lysandra stared out the window, her mind spiraling. She wanted to believe this nightmare would end if she just turned off her phone, deleted the app, and disappeared. But deep down, she knew that wasn't true. Whoever was doing this wasn't just using Snapchat. They were following her, tracking her in real life. Everin, she said suddenly, her voice strained. What if this started before Snapchat? He shot her a glance. What do you mean? She gripped the edge of her seat, thinking back. I started noticing no face snap when I posted more frequently. But what if they were already watching before that? Everin's grip on the wheel tightened. Like what? A coworker? Someone from the cafe? Lysandra's mind reeled. She thought of the customers she served every day, the familiar faces she barely paid attention to. How many times had she smiled at a stranger without a second thought? A deep unease settled in her chest. I don't know, but whoever they are, they know too much. The gas station appeared like a ghostly beacon on the empty road. Everin pulled in without hesitation, parking under the dull fluorescence of the overhead lights. We need to regroup, he said. Figure out our next move. Lysandra nodded, though her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She stepped out of the car, stretching her legs, her eyes darting around the empty lot. The station was nearly deserted, save for a tired-looking attendant inside. Everin locked the car as they walked inside. The harsh artificial light made her feel exposed, vulnerable. She pulled her hoodie tighter around her shoulders as she followed him to the back of the store, grabbing bottles of water and a few protein bars. Everin leaned against the counter, pulling out his phone again. Still nothing. Lysandra exhaled, trying to steady her breathing. Maybe we finally lost them. The words felt hollow even as she said them. As they walked back to the car, the weight in her chest didn't ease. Something still felt off. They sat in the car for a while, eating in silence. The radio played faintly, some old rock song that neither of them were paying attention to. Then Everin stiffened. Lysandra noticed immediately. What? He didn't answer right away. He was staring into the rearview mirror, his breath slow and controlled. Lysandra turned her head slightly, following his gaze. A car had pulled into the gas station. It wasn't unusual. People came and went all the time. But something about this car sent a chill down her spine. The windows were tinted so dark that she couldn't see inside. Everin kept his hands still on the wheel. Act normal, he murmured. Don't look for too long. Lysandra swallowed hard, facing forward again. She reached for her phone, her fingers clumsy and numb. Then her screen lit up. A new Snapchat notification. Her stomach dropped. Everin's phone buzzed at the same time. He glanced down, his face darkening. Lysandra forced herself to look at the screen. A new message. From No Face Snap. She hesitated before tapping on it. The message opened instantly. A photo. Of them. Sitting in the car. From behind. Her blood ran cold. Everin cursed under his breath. They're here. Lysandra didn't dare turn around. Her entire body was frozen, her heart hammering against her ribs. What do we do? She whispered. Everin's voice was dangerously calm. We get out of here. Now! He threw the car into reverse, peeling out of the parking lot before the other car could move. The tires screeched against the pavement as he sped onto the road, the gas station disappearing behind them. Lysandra finally turned, her breath catching in her throat. The car was following, headlights glowing, unwavering. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. Another photo. This time it was a video. She hesitated before pressing play. The screen flickered to life. It was dark at first, shaky. Then the image cleared, and her entire body went cold. The camera was inside the gas station, filming them, filming her, watching her as she stared at her phone. She dropped the device onto her lap, her breath coming in gasps. "Everin, I know," he said through gritted teeth. "Hold on." He pressed harder on the gas, the car roaring forward into the night. But no matter how fast they went, the headlights behind them never wavered. Whoever was following them wasn't giving up, and they were running out of places to hide. The road ahead was a blur of asphalt and distant headlights. Everin's hands clenched the steering wheel, his jaw locked in determination. Lysandra sat beside him, her phone clutched so tightly in her hand that her knuckles turned white. Behind them, the pursuing car followed at a steady distance. It never got too close, never tried to overtake them. It simply lingered in the darkness, a silent predator keeping its prey within reach. Lysandra's phone buzzed again. Another message. Another photo. Her heart pounded as she opened it. A picture of the back of Everin's car. They were being watched. Every second. Every move. Her breathing was uneven. "Everin, they're toying with us." "I know," he muttered. He took a sharp turn onto a side road, the car jolting as they left the main highway. Lysandra clung to the door handle. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere they can't follow." The trees grew denser as they drove, the headlights illuminating the thick foliage ahead. The city lights had disappeared behind them, replaced by an overwhelming silence. It was an old forest road, barely used, overgrown with weeds. The pursuing car hesitated at the entrance, its headlights flickering through the trees like the eyes of a predator deciding whether to strike. Then it turned off its lights. A chill crawled up Lysandra's spine. "Everin, I saw," he cut in. His voice was tight, controlled. He pressed harder on the gas. "They don't want to follow us here. That's a good thing. Or a bad thing," Lysandra whispered. The dirt road twisted and turned, barely wide enough for their car. The further they went, the more suffocating the darkness became. Everin pulled over near an abandoned logging site, cutting the engine. The silence was deafening. Lysandra strained her ears, listening. Nothing. She exhaled, leaning back against the seat. "I think we lost them." Everin nodded, though he didn't relax. He reached for his phone, checking the screen. Still no new messages. Lysandra checked hers too. The last message was the photo of Everin's car. Since then, nothing. She swallowed. "What if they're waiting for us to come back? Then we don't go back." Lysandra blinked. "Everin, we can't just..." He turned to her, his eyes dark. Listen to me. Whoever this is, they know where you live. They knew we were at the motel. They followed us here. You think going back will keep us safe?" She shuddered. "Then what do we do?" He exhaled, staring ahead at the dark road. "We figure out who they are before they figure out their next move." They spent the next hour watching the road, waiting for any sign of movement. The forest around them was eerily quiet, save for the occasional rustle of wind through the trees. Lysandra tried to calm her racing mind. Her fingers hovered over her phone's screen, debating whether to send a message to someone, anyone. But what could she even say? Then her phone vibrated. A new Snapchat notification. Her breath caught in her throat as she tapped on it. "No FaceSnap is typing." Her pulse thundered in her ears. The typing bubble blinked once, twice. Then it disappeared. Nothing came through. No message. No picture. Just silence. Lysandra's skin prickled. "Everin, they're online." His head snapped toward her. "They messaged you?" "No," she whispered. They started typing. Then they stopped. Everin frowned, his jaw tightening. "They're watching us. They want us to know they're still here." Lysandra shivered. And then, another notification. A new message. This time, it wasn't a photo. It wasn't a video. It was a location, sent directly to her. Lysandra's throat went dry. She stared at the pin on her screen, the small red marker flashing ominously. She zoomed in, her stomach twisting. It was a location deep inside the forest. And it wasn't far from where they were right now. Everin grabbed the phone, his brows furrowing. "They want us to go there." Lysandra shook her head. "No, it's a trap." "Obviously," he muttered. "But why send us a location now? They've been following us all night. What changed?" Her fingers trembled as she clutched her phone. "Maybe they're done playing." Everin's eyes darkened. "Then we're running out of time." The forest around them felt even quieter, like the world itself was holding its breath. Lysandra's phone buzzed again. Another message. "Come find me." Her heart stopped. Everin started the car without hesitation. We're not playing their game. We're getting out of here. He threw the car into reverse, tires kicking up dirt as they turned back toward the main road. The branches clawed at the sides of the vehicle as they sped away from the pinned location. But as they neared the exit of the forest, Lysandra felt her phone vibrate one last time. She didn't want to look. She looked anyway. A final message. A video. Her hands shook as she pressed play. The screen flickered, the image shaky. The camera moved through the forest, just like they had moments ago. And then it stopped. The camera was focused on a car. Their car. Right now. The video ended. A whisper of breath escaped her lips. Everin! I know! He cut her off, his foot pressing harder on the gas. But deep down, they both knew the truth. They weren't alone, and they weren't the ones doing the chasing anymore. Everin's grip on the wheel was tight enough to turn his knuckles white. The car bounced slightly over the uneven dirt road, the trees on either side rushing past in a blur of darkness. The pinned location on Lysandra's phone burned in her mind. They had left it behind, but that didn't mean they were safe. The video had proven that. Someone was close. Too close. Lysandra's breath came in short, sharp bursts. She kept glancing over her shoulder, expecting to see another set of headlights appearing from nowhere, cutting through the black void of the forest. Nothing, but that didn't bring her any comfort. We should have never come this way, she whispered, her fingers trembling as she clutched her phone. We should have gone somewhere with people. Cameras. Witnesses. Everin exhaled through his nose, keeping his eyes locked on the road ahead. I thought getting off the grid would throw them off. Then why do I feel like they wanted us to do this? Silence. Lysandra tightened her grip around her seatbelt. Everin, what if we're not running from them anymore? He shot her a glance. What do you mean? She hesitated, her pulse hammering against her ribs. What if we're being led somewhere? Everin didn't respond, but she could see his jaw clenching harder. He was thinking the same thing. Then Lysandra's phone vibrated again. Her stomach turned. Slowly, she lifted it, her screen illuminating the dark interior of the car. A new message. No face snap, almost there. Her throat went dry. She read the words 3 times, her mind trying to process them. Almost there? What the hell does that mean? She whispered. Everin's foot pressed harder on the gas. I don't care. We're getting out of here. The car roared forward, the trees blurring into streaks of shadow and moonlight. They were close to the edge of the forest now. Just a little farther, and they'd be back on the highway. Back to civilization. Then Lysandra's phone buzzed again. Another message. No face snap, don't leave. We're waiting. A lump formed in her throat. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She turned to Everin, her voice barely above a whisper. They knew we were going to leave. Everin didn't answer. He only gritted his teeth and drove faster. The moment they hit the main road again, Lysandra exhaled in relief. The forest was behind them, swallowed by the dark. But the unease didn't leave her. She checked her phone again. No new messages. Maybe they really had escaped. Everin turned onto the highway, merging onto the open road. Few cars passed by, their headlights streaking like ghosts in the night. It felt safer here, like they had finally put some distance between them and whatever had been stalking them. Lysandra closed her eyes for a brief second, trying to ground herself. But then, BZZZT. Another message. She flinched, her fingers shaking as she unlocked her phone. A new video. Her lungs tightened. Everin. He didn't respond, but his grip on the wheel tightened. Lysandra forced herself to press play. The screen flickered, static at first. Then the image became clear. The camera was moving, swaying slightly, as if whoever was holding it was walking. Through a parking lot. A parking lot that looked eerily familiar. Lysandra's breath hitched. No! Then the camera tilted downward, focusing on a car. Her car, parked right outside her apartment complex. And then a hand. A pale, slender hand reaching out, pressing its fingers against her driver's side window. The video ended. Lysandra's heart stopped. They're at my apartment, she breathed. Everin cursed under his breath. No way in hell we're going back there. She nodded, gripping her phone so tightly her fingers hurt. But another terrible thought crawled into her mind, spreading like ice through her veins. They weren't just tracking her. They were waiting. Everin turned onto an exit ramp, pulling into the parking lot of a 24-hour diner. The bright lights from the neon sign cast eerie red and blue shadows over the pavement. Other cars were parked in the lot, the glow of interior lights making her feel, for the first time in hours, like she wasn't alone in the world. They sat in silence for a moment, the engine humming beneath them. Then Evren turned to her. "We have to end this." Lysandra swallowed. "Ow!" Evren's jaw tightened. "We don't run anymore. We fight back." She frowned. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we lure them out." Lysandra's stomach twisted. The idea of facing whoever, or whatever, was behind this made her blood run cold. But she also knew they couldn't live like this. Constantly running, constantly looking over their shoulders. Evren looked her in the eye, his voice steady. "We make them think we're alone, that we're vulnerable." Lysandra exhaled shakily. "And then," his gaze darkened, "then we catch them." She wanted to argue, wanted to say it was too dangerous. But deep down she knew he was right. Running wasn't working. Hiding wasn't working. It was time to face the hunter in the dark. Lysandra took a deep breath and nodded. "Let's do it." The neon glow of the 24-hour diner cast eerie reflections against the windshield. The hum of the engine was the only sound inside the car. Lysandra's pulse was still racing, her body refusing to calm down despite being surrounded by people. The diner's parking lot was full, trucks, sedans, old station wagons, but none of them belonged to the person hunting them. Not yet. Evren drummed his fingers against the wheel, his eyes scanning the lot. "If we're doing this, we have to be careful." Lysandra nodded, swallowing hard. "What's the plan?" "We make them think we're vulnerable," Evren said, turning off the engine. "We sit inside, pretend we're not being cautious, and wait for them to make a move. And then we catch them." Lysandra's stomach twisted at the thought. Luring out someone who had been stalking them for days, maybe weeks, felt reckless, but they were out of options. Running hadn't worked. Hiding hadn't worked. It was time to turn the game around. The inside of the diner smelled like burnt coffee and fried food. The chatter of late-night customers hummed around them, the clinking of cutlery and sizzling from the grill filling the air. Lysandra and Evren chose a booth near the window, their backs to the entrance. The perfect bait. A waitress appeared, tired but friendly. "What can I get you too?" "Coffee," Evren answered. "Black." Lysandra hesitated. She wasn't hungry, but ordering nothing might look suspicious. Same. And fries." The waitress scribbled on her notepad and shuffled away. Evren leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Check your phone. See if they've sent anything." Lysandra's fingers trembled as she unlocked her phone. She hesitated before opening Snapchat. Her inbox was empty. "No new messages," she whispered. "Do you think we lost them?" Evren shook his head. "They're just waiting." Lysandra exhaled, trying to ignore the weight pressing down on her chest. She turned to stare out the window, scanning the parking lot. Everything looked the same, cars parked under flickering streetlights, a man pumping gas, a woman talking on her phone near the entrance. And then she saw it, a car at the far end of the lot. It wasn't parked near any of the others. It wasn't near the entrance or the gas station. It was tucked in the shadows, where only the faintest sliver of moonlight hit the windshield. The headlights were off. The engine was silent. But she knew. "They're here," she whispered. Evren followed her gaze, his face hardening. He didn't move, didn't react, but she could see the tension in his shoulders. "Stay calm," he murmured. "They're watching us, waiting for us to slip up." The waitress returned with their coffee and fries, placing them on the table with a tired smile. Lysandra barely noticed. Her pulse pounded in her ears as she forced herself to stir sugar into her coffee, pretending everything was normal. Minutes passed. Then Lysandra's phone buzzed. A new message. From No Face Snap. She didn't want to open it. Every instinct screamed at her to put the phone down and walk away. But she forced herself to tap the notification. The message was just 3 words. "Nice spot. Cute." Lysandra's throat tightened. She could feel her heartbeat against her ribs. "They're watching us." Evren clenched his jaw. "Good." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small black device, his old phone. Lysandra frowned. "What are you doing?" "Sending them a message." She watched as he quickly created a new Snapchat account. He typed something, then hit send. Her phone buzzed almost immediately after. A message. From unknown. She hesitated before reading it. Smart move, but not smart enough. Then another buzz. Another picture. Lysandra's stomach dropped as she opened the image. It was a photo of them, taken from inside the diner. Her breath hitched. She whipped her head around, scanning the booths, the counter, the people eating their late-night meals. Someone in here had taken that picture. "They're inside," she whispered. Everin was already moving. His eyes scanned the room, his muscles tense. "We're leaving." Lysandra didn't argue. She slid out of the booth, keeping her head low as they made their way toward the exit. Every nerve in her body screamed at her to run, but she forced herself to stay calm. As they stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. The parking lot was still. The mysterious car in the shadows hadn't moved. Everin pulled out his keys, unlocking the car remotely. They moved fast, slipping inside and locking the doors. Lysandra's hands were shaking as she turned on her phone again. Another message. This one sent chills through her bones. Leaving so soon? Everin turned the key in the ignition. The car rumbled to life, but before he could shift into drive, the streetlights above them flickered. Then the entire parking lot went dark. Lysandra gasped, her fingers digging into the seat. The only light left came from the neon diner sign, casting eerie red and blue glows onto the pavement. Everin cursed under his breath. "They're screwing with us." Then movement. A figure in the distance. Near the shadowed car. Lysandra barely had time to register it before Everin slammed his foot onto the gas. The tires screeched against the pavement as they sped out of the parking lot, leaving the darkness and the watcher behind. Lysandra gripped the dashboard, trying to catch her breath. "Everin, we can't keep running." His eyes were dark, unreadable. "We won't." She turned to him, her pulse still hammering. "What do we do?" Everin exhaled sharply. "We set our own trap." Lysandra stared at him. "You mean?" "We're going to find them," he said, his voice unwavering. "Before they find us first." The highway stretched out before them, dark and endless. The glow of the dashboard illuminated Lysandra's face as she stared at her phone, waiting for another message. Everin drove in silence, his grip on the wheel firm, his jaw clenched. They had been running for too long. Now it was time to turn the tables. "We need to end this tonight," Everin said, breaking the tense silence. "No more running. No more waiting for them to make the next move." Lysandra nodded. "How?" "They're always ahead of us." Everin's eyes flicked toward her, his expression unreadable. "Not this time." Everin pulled into the parking lot of an abandoned shopping plaza. The dim glow of a single streetlight flickered above them, casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Lysandra shivered. "This is where we do it," he said. Lysandra frowned. "Here." Everin nodded. "They've been tracking your location, sending you messages in real time. If we post something that makes it look like we're vulnerable, they'll come." Lysandra hesitated, but she knew he was right. Whoever was behind this wanted control. They wanted to watch. If they thought she was weak, alone, exposed, they'd take the bait. Taking a deep breath, she pulled out her phone and opened Snapchat. Her fingers hovered over the screen before she typed out a message. "Tired of running. Need to figure this out. Alone." She snapped a picture of the empty lot and posted it to her story. Then they waited. Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 15. Lysandra's stomach churned with anxiety. Had they figured out the trap? Were they watching from somewhere close? Then her phone buzzed. A new message. From No Face Snap. Lysandra's breath caught as she opened it. A single word. "Turn around." Her blood turned to ice. Slowly, her fingers shaking, she lifted her gaze to the rearview mirror. A figure stood at the edge of the lot, just beyond the glow of the flickering streetlight. Unmoving. Watching. Everin saw them too. His hand moved toward the door handle. "Stay here." Everin, no. But he was already out of the car. The figure didn't move as Everin approached, his posture tense, ready to strike. Lysandra's heart pounded as she gripped her phone, recording everything. "Who are you?" Everin demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The figure took a step forward, and for the first time, Lysandra saw their face, or rather, the mask they were wearing. A smooth, featureless mask. "No," she whispered, realization crashing into her. The mask was identical to her own face. Everin lunged. The figure darted back fast, too fast. Their movements were eerily fluid, unnatural. Lysandra scrambled out of the car, her heart hammering in her chest. The masked figure cocked their head, then slowly lifted a phone. A gloved hand tapped the screen. Lysandra's phone buzzed. Another message. Not bad, but not good enough. Then, without warning, the figure turned and sprinted into the darkness. "Everin!" Lysandra shouted. He didn't hesitate. He took off after them, feet pounding against the pavement. Lysandra followed, adrenaline surging through her veins. The figure weaved through the lot, slipping between abandoned cars, dodging around crumbling walls. Then they vanished. Just gone. Everin skidded to a stop, breathing hard. Lysandra caught up to him, gasping for air. "Where did they go?" she panted. Everin shook his head. "I don't know." Lysandra's phone buzzed one last time. A video message. With a shaking hand, she opened it. The footage was grainy, but she recognized the setting immediately. It was her apartment. The camera moved slowly through her living room, down the hall, past her bedroom door. Then it stopped. The camera turned, and there, standing in the reflection of her bedroom mirror, was herself, or something wearing her face. The video cut to black. A final message appeared. "See you soon." Cormac had always been casual about social media. Snapchat was something he used to send dumb selfies, quick messages, or share random moments from his day. He never put much thought into it, until the night everything changed. It started like any other evening. He was lying in bed, scrolling mindlessly through his phone. His roommate, Lucian, had already passed out on the couch, his snores filling their tiny apartment. Bored, Jake snapped a quick selfie. Eyes half closed, tongue out, captioned, "Me losing brain cells at 2 a.m. He sent it to his friends, then tossed his phone onto the pillow beside him. His eyelids grew heavy, and he let himself drift off. Bzzzt. The vibration against his pillow startled him awake. He squinted at the screen, Snapchat notification. A message from Darren. Jake frowned, glancing toward the couch. Darren was still dead asleep, unmoving. His phone lay face down on the coffee table. There was no way he had just sent something. Curious, Jake opened the snap. The image was dark, almost completely black, except for a faint, eerie glow. The silhouette of a person stood in the corner of Jake's room. Their face was hidden in shadow, but he could feel their stare piercing through the screen. His breath caught in his throat. His fingers trembled as he typed back. "What the hell, dude?" No response. Jake sat up, his heart pounding. "Darren," he called softly. No answer. Just snores. Bzzzt. Another notification. Another snap from Darren's account. He hesitated before opening it. This time, the picture was clearer. It was of him, sleeping. Jake's blood turned to ice. His stomach twisted violently. He scrambled out of bed, flicking on the light. The room was empty. He spun toward the couch. "Darren!" His roommate jolted awake, groggy and confused. "What?" Jake held up his phone. "Dude, did you send me these?" Darren blinked at the screen, rubbing his face. "What are you talking about?" "These snaps," Jake's voice shook. "From your account." Darren sat up, grabbing his own phone. He unlocked it and frowned. "I didn't send anything." Jake checked the timestamps. The messages had been sent just minutes ago. His eyes darted back to the most recent picture. His own sleeping form, the camera angled slightly downward, as if someone had been standing right next to his bed. A sharp knock at the door made both of them jump. Jake's heart nearly stopped. He and Darren exchanged a look. Neither of them moved. Bzzzt. Jake's phone vibrated again. Another message. This one had no image. No text. Just a single emoji. Jake's breath hitched. The knock at the door came again, this time louder. Then, the doorknob turned. The doorknob rattled, sending a jolt of pure terror through Cormac's body. His pulse pounded in his ears as he and Lucian sat frozen, staring at the entrance to their apartment. Another knock. Harder this time. Lucian, still groggy, rubbed his face and muttered, "Who the hell is knocking at this hour?" Cormac didn't answer. His phone buzzed again. Another message from no sender. He hesitated, then opened it. It was a video. His thumb hovered over the play button. His instincts screamed at him not to watch it, but he couldn't stop himself. He tapped the screen. At first, it was just static. Then the camera steadied. The footage showed the hallway outside their apartment. And then, a figure stepped into view. The camera was angled low, as if placed on the ground, and it captured a tall, thin figure standing in front of their door. Their face was obscured by shadow, but their hand, the same pale, skeletal hand from before, slowly reached for the doorknob. Cormac's breath hitched. The video wasn't pre-recorded. It was live. "Lucian," Cormac whispered. "Someone's outside." Lucian frowned but stood up, grabbing a heavy wrench from under the couch. "Call the cops." Cormac's fingers fumbled as he pulled up his phone dialer. But before he could type, another message popped up. "No need to call. I'm already here." The knocking stopped. Cormac's body went rigid. Slowly, he turned his gaze back to the door. The peephole was dark. Someone was covering it. Lucian clenched the wrench tighter. "We need to get out of here." Cormac barely had time to nod before a new sound sent fresh terror through his veins. A soft, deliberate tapping on the window. Not from the front door. From the bedroom. His bedroom. Neither of them moved at first. Cormac's brain struggled to catch up with reality. They lived on the 3rd floor. No fire escape. No ledges. Nothing outside that window but 3 stories of empty air. And yet, someone was tapping on the glass. Lucian's grip tightened on the wrench. "Cormac." Cormac swallowed hard. "Yeah, we run on 3. He nodded, barely breathing. Lucian raised his fingers, counting down. 3, 2, 1. The moment he hit 0, they bolted for the door. Lucian yanked it open, and they burst into the hallway. The door slammed behind them, echoing in the silence. The hallway was empty. For a second, Cormac thought maybe, just maybe, they had imagined it all. Maybe the stress, the lack of sleep, the paranoia had finally gotten to them. Then his phone buzzed again. Another message. Another video. Cormac's stomach twisted into knots as he opened it. The screen flickered to life, showing shaky, low-angled footage. This time, the camera was inside their apartment. The video panned slowly, moving past the couch, the kitchen, the TV. Then it turned toward the open door. Toward them. Lucian's phone vibrated in his pocket. Cormac looked up, his mouth dry. "Did you?" Lucian pulled his phone out, his face paling. "Cormac." His voice shook as he turned the screen toward him. Another message. A single word. "Run." Then, from inside their apartment, the sound of something heavy hitting the floor. Cormac's blood went cold. They weren't alone. Lucian grabbed Cormac's arm and yanked him down the hallway. Their feet pounded against the old wooden floors, their shadows stretching under the flickering hallway lights. Behind them, their apartment door stood wide open, swinging slightly as if something had just passed through it. Neither of them looked back. They tore through the dimly lit corridor, past the other apartment doors. Cormac's mind raced. Someone, something, had been in their apartment, watching them, filming them. And it wasn't just inside. It had been at the window 3 stories up. Lucian pressed the button for the elevator. Nothing happened. "Shit," he hissed. He slammed his palm against the button again, but the doors didn't budge. Cormac turned. Stairs. They sprinted for the stairwell, nearly stumbling as they shoved the door open and rushed downward. The echo of their footfalls bounced against the concrete walls. Each step felt like it took forever. Then, bzzzt. Cormac's phone vibrated. His breath hitched. He didn't want to look. He didn't want to see another message, another picture, another eerie sign that someone was right behind them. But his hands moved on their own. He lifted the phone. A new message from No Face Snap. He hesitated, then tapped the notification. It was a picture of the stairwell, taken from just a few steps above them. Cormac's heart nearly stopped. His legs froze mid-step. He barely managed to turn his head, his breath caught in his throat. Lucian noticed his panic. "What?" "Someone's here," Cormac whispered, his voice barely audible. Lucian's gaze shot upward. The dim light flickered overhead. The stairs above them stretched into darkness. Nothing moved. Bzzzt. Another message. Cormac swallowed hard and forced himself to open it. A video. With shaking fingers, he pressed play. At first, it was just static. Then the camera steadied, showing the stairwell, the exact spot they were standing in. But in the video, they weren't alone. There was a figure on the steps just above them. Tall, motionless, facing them. Cormac felt ice run through his veins. His head snapped up. The stairs above were empty. Lucian grabbed his wrist. "Move. Now." They bolted down the remaining flights, nearly tripping over themselves in their rush. The emergency exit door loomed ahead. Lucian threw his weight against it, and they burst into the night. Cold air slapped Cormac's face. They were in the back alley, the streetlights casting long, eerie shadows. The night was unnervingly silent, the distant hum of traffic the only sound. Lucian doubled over, hands on his knees. What the hell was that? Cormac couldn't answer. He stared at his phone, breathless. He had barely registered the fact that they had made it outside, that they had escaped the apartment. Then his screen went black. What the? He tapped at it. The battery wasn't dead. It had been at 80% just minutes ago. Then it buzzed one last time. The screen lit up. A new message appeared. You can run. I'll be waiting. Cormac's throat went dry. Slowly, he turned his head and looked back up at their apartment building. The window to his bedroom was wide open. And in the darkness, just barely visible against the night sky, a silhouette stood there, watching. Lucian grabbed Cormac's sleeve, yanking him away from the building. We're not staying here. Cormac barely registered the words. His eyes remained locked on the shadow in the window, on the figure that stood perfectly still, watching. His stomach twisted as he tried to make out its features, but the darkness swallowed them whole. Then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the silhouette shifted. The window slammed shut. Cormac's breath came out in a shaky gasp. Did you see that? Lucian didn't answer. He was already moving, dragging Cormac toward the street. We need to go. Where? Anywhere but here. They walked for nearly an hour, staying away from main roads, dodging security cameras like fugitives. Lucian's mind was already running through possibilities. Hotels weren't an option, too easy to track. A friend's house? Not safe enough. We can't go back, Lucian said finally, breaking the silence. Cormac swallowed. What do you mean? We have nothing. Not if they can get inside our apartment whenever they want. Cormac shivered at the memory. So what? We just live on the streets. Lucian exhaled sharply. We need a place to think. Cormac checked his phone again. Still black. No messages. No battery issues. Just dead. As if something or someone had taken control of it. Lucian's phone, however, was still working. He pulled up a map. There's an all-night diner a few blocks from here. Cormac nodded. Okay, let's go. The diner was nearly empty, the neon lights buzzing softly above cracked vinyl booths. A tired-looking waitress barely acknowledged them as they slid into a booth at the back. Cormac's nerves were still rattled. He drummed his fingers against the table, his knee bouncing under it. Lucian, what the hell is happening? Lucian exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Someone's playing with us. And they're good. Cormac's voice was hoarse. No, this is more than just playing. They were in our apartment. They knew where we were in the stairwell. They knew we were running. Lucian didn't respond. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his messages. I haven't gotten anything since that last "I'll be waiting" text. Cormac clenched his fists. Do you think they're still watching us? Lucian's gaze flicked up to the large front windows of the diner. The street outside was quiet. No moving cars. No people. For now. Then. BZZZT. Cormac's phone vibrated violently against the table. The screen, previously dead, flickered back to life. A new message appeared. From No Face Snap. Cormac hesitated, then clicked it open. A single image. His stomach dropped. It was a picture of them, sitting in the diner, taken from outside. Cormac's hands went ice cold. He turned his head toward the window, dread pooling in his gut. The street looked the same, empty, quiet. Lucian's phone buzzed next. Another image. Cormac's blood turned to ice. The picture was taken from a different angle. Closer. Lucian's voice was quiet but steady. We're not alone. Cormac's heart pounded. Do we run? Lucian studied the reflection in the window, scanning for movement. Then his phone vibrated again. This time it was a video. Lucian's hands were steady as he pressed play. The footage was dark, the camera shaking slightly as it zoomed in. At first, there was nothing but static and blurred movement. Then the image steadied. A shadowed figure stood outside the diner, facing the window, looking right at them. And then, the screen went black. Then a message appeared. Come outside. Cormac's throat was dry as he read the message again. Come outside. Lucian's grip on his phone tightened. His leg bounced under the table, a sharp contrast to the eerily still street beyond the diner window. Cormac slowly exhaled, trying to steady himself. We're not going out there. Lucian glanced at him, then back at the screen. You think they'll just leave us alone if we stay put? Cormac's fingers curled into a fist. I don't know, but I do know that whoever this is, they're toying with us. Lucian's gaze flicked toward the glass. The diner's neon sign cast a dim glow onto the sidewalk, distorting shadows that stretched unnaturally long. The street was quiet. Too quiet. Then, BZZZT. Another message. Cormac hesitated before opening it. A video. He pressed play. The camera was shaky, moving from side to side as if someone was pacing. It showed the outside of the diner, the neon lights reflecting against the wet pavement. Then the camera turned, zooming in on the booth where they sat. The feed was live. A cold chill ran down Cormac's spine. He whipped his head around, scanning the street. Still nothing. Lucian's voice was low. They want us to know they're close. BZZZT. Cormac's phone vibrated again. Last chance. Lucian didn't hesitate. He reached into his jacket, pulled out a pocket knife, and exhaled through his nose. We're not playing their game. Cormac swallowed hard. Then what do we do? Lucian's eyes scanned the diner. There's a back exit. We leave through there. But what if they're already waiting for us? Lucian met his gaze, unflinching. Then we stop running. The back of the diner was dimly lit, the faint buzz of a flickering bulb the only sound as they pushed open the exit door. The alley smelled like damp concrete and grease from the kitchen's dumpsters. Cormac's hands trembled as he tightened his grip on his phone, every nerve in his body screaming at him to run. Lucian stepped out first, his body tense, his knife held low but ready. He scanned the alley. Nothing. A gust of wind kicked up loose wrappers and old newspapers. The silence was suffocating. Cormac stepped forward. Then movement. A figure emerged from the darkness at the far end of the alley. Tall, unmoving, watching. Cormac's breath caught in his throat. His mind screamed at him to run, but his body refused to move. Lucian's stance shifted, ready to fight. Who the hell are you? No response. The figure simply stood there, their face obscured by the shadows. Then slowly they lifted their phone. Cormac's phone vibrated in his pocket. A message. He didn't want to open it. Didn't want to see whatever nightmare awaited him on the screen. But his fingers betrayed him, sliding over the screen and unlocking it. A picture. Of him. Standing right where he was. The exact same posture. The exact same lighting. Taken just seconds ago. Cormac's stomach twisted violently. He looked back up at the figure. They were gone. Lucian cursed under his breath, stepping forward. But there was nothing but darkness and empty space where the person had stood. The air around them felt charged, thick with something unseen. Cormac. Lucian's voice was tense. We need to move. Cormac barely heard him. His pulse roared in his ears. He checked his phone again, scrolling up. The picture was still there. Then another message appeared. Nice try. BZZZT. Another video. His stomach dropped as he opened it. The footage was from behind them. A live feed. Cormac turned, his blood running cold. A camera was recording them. From the shadows of the alley. Lucian grabbed his arm. Run! They took off without looking back. Footsteps pounded against the pavement behind them. Fast. Too fast. Whoever or whatever it was they were gaining. Lucian wove through the narrow streets, yanking Cormac behind him. They burst onto a busier street, the glow of city lights offering a sliver of safety. Cars passed, people walked, the hum of life surrounding them again. Cormac's breath came in ragged gasps. He turned sharply, expecting to see the figure pursuing them. But the alley was empty. Lucian cursed under his breath. They're screwing with us. Cormac bent over, hands on his knees. They knew. They knew exactly what we'd do. Lucian's jaw clenched. Which means they know where we're going next. Cormac straightened, his stomach twisting. Lucian, this isn't just someone messing with us. Lucian's eyes were cold. I know. BZZZT. Another message. Both of them looked down at Cormac's phone. Still watching. Cormac's grip on his phone tightened. This doesn't end until we end it. Lucian nodded. Then it's time to go after them. Lucian and Cormac stood in the middle of the sidewalk, their breath ragged, hearts pounding. The city lights buzzed around them, but it felt like they were the only two people in the world. The messages, the live footage, the picture taken mere seconds before, it was all too much. We need to go after them, Lucian repeated, his voice low and sharp. Cormac wiped sweat from his brow. How? They're always one step ahead. Lucian's jaw clenched. Then we make them slip up. Cormac hesitated. You mean? We set a trap, Lucian interrupted. Lure them in. Make them think they still have the upper hand. Cormac's stomach twisted. He wasn't sure if Lucian was reckless or brilliant, or both. How do we do that? Lucian's eyes darkened. We go somewhere we control. Somewhere we can see them coming before they see us. Cormac exhaled sharply. And where exactly is that? Lucian's lips pressed into a thin line. My uncle's old auto shop. It's been abandoned for years, but it still has cameras they won't have access to. Cormac's chest tightened. The idea of luring this thing, whoever they were, into a trap sounded insane. But doing nothing wasn't an option. Fine, he muttered. Let's do it. The auto shop was located on the outskirts of the city, down a road that hadn't seen much traffic in years. The towering garage doors were rusted, graffiti covering parts of the brick walls. A single street lamp flickered dimly outside, barely casting enough light to see. Lucian pulled out a set of keys and unlocked the door. It creaked as they stepped inside, the scent of oil and metal thick in the air. Dust clung to every surface, remnants of a place long forgotten. Cormac peered into the darkness. You sure the cameras still work? Lucian walked over to a rusted desk in the corner and yanked open a drawer. Inside, an old monitor sat covered in grime. He wiped it clean with his sleeve and pressed the power button. The screen flickered. One by one, the security feeds came to life. The grainy images showed different angles of the garage, the entrance, the alley out back, and the surrounding street. Cormac exhaled. All right, now what? Lucian grabbed a spare phone from his jacket pocket. Now we give them something to chase. Cormac frowned as Lucian created a brand new Snapchat account. He snapped a picture of the empty garage and typed out a message. Tired of running. Let's end this. He hit send. Seconds later, the phone buzzed. A new message. Cormac's breath caught in his throat as he read it. On my way. They sat in the dimly lit garage, waiting. The only sound was the distant hum of the monitor and the occasional creak of the old building shifting. Every passing second felt like an eternity. Cormac clenched his fists. What if they don't show? Lucian's eyes were locked on the screen. They will. Minutes passed. Then, BZZZT. Cormac flinched as his phone vibrated in his hand. A picture. His stomach twisted as he opened it. It was an image of the garage, taken from outside. Lucian's grip on the desk tightened. They're here. Cormac's pulse skyrocketed. He turned toward the entrance, his breath hitching. The security feed showed the grainy image of the front door. A shadow moved past the camera. Lucian reached for his knife. Stay low. Stay quiet. Cormac crouched behind a stack of old tires, his heartbeat hammering in his ears. Then, the door creaked open. The air inside the garage shifted, like something unnatural had slipped inside with them. The temperature felt colder, the hairs on the back of Cormac's neck standing on end. A slow, deliberate footstep echoed through the space. Then another. Cormac held his breath, gripping the edge of the tires. He could see the faintest outline of a figure moving through the darkness. It wasn't rushing. It wasn't searching. It knew exactly where they were. Another step. Closer. BZZZT. Cormac's phone vibrated. He barely dared to glance at it. A video. His trembling fingers pressed play. The footage was dark, shaky. It looked like it had been recorded from just behind where he crouched, as if someone was standing right behind him. His blood turned to ice. A voice whispered in his ear. Got you. Cormac whipped around. The figure lunged. A struggle erupted in the darkness. Cormac barely had time to register what was happening before Lucian tackled the intruder. The two of them crashing against an old tool bench. Metal clattered to the ground as they fought. Lucian's knife slashed through the air, but the figure was fast, inhumanly fast. They twisted away, landing on their feet like a shadow given form. Cormac scrambled back, grabbing a wrench from the floor. He swung blindly. The figure dodged, but the movement sent them stumbling into the light. And for the first time, Cormac saw their face. Except, it wasn't a face at all. It was a mask. A featureless, pale mask with dark slits where eyes should have been. The mouth was an empty, expressionless line. A distorted voice echoed from beneath it. This isn't over. Then, in one impossibly fast motion, the figure bolted toward the back door. Lucian ran after them, but by the time he reached the alley, the figure was gone. Vanished into the night. Cormac's breath came in short gasps. His body shook as he turned back to Lucian, his mind still struggling to process what he had just seen. Lucian stood in the alley, staring into the darkness. His hands were clenched, his jaw tight. "This isn't just some hacker," Cormac whispered. Lucian exhaled sharply. "No." He turned to face him. "This is something worse." The silence in the garage was suffocating. The masked figure had vanished, leaving only the faint echoes of their footsteps dissolving into the night. Cormac's chest heaved as he struggled to steady his breath. Lucian stood by the back entrance, his body tense, knife still clutched in his hand. Cormac wiped sweat from his forehead. What the hell was that? Lucian exhaled sharply, his fingers twitching as he adjusted his grip on the blade. That wasn't just some stalker. No kidding. Cormac looked down at his phone, which had fallen to the floor during the scuffle. The screen was cracked, but it still worked. A single notification blinked at him. A message. From No Face Snap. His hands shook as he opened it. Close, but not close enough. A second later, another message popped up. Try again. Cormac's stomach churned. He turned the screen toward Lucian. They're still watching. Lucian's jaw tightened. He turned toward the old security monitor, checking the feeds. The cameras flickered in and out of static, as if something was interfering with the signal. Then, a shadow moved in the alleyway. Cormac's breath hitched. They're still here. Lucian didn't hesitate. He grabbed his phone and snapped a picture of the security feed, then sent a reply to No Face Snap. Let's finish this. Cormac's pulse pounded. Lucian, are you insane? We barely made it out alive last time. Lucian turned to him, his expression unreadable. We have to find out who they are. We have to see their face. Cormac clenched his fists. The idea of confronting this thing, this person, terrified him, but he knew Lucian was right. They couldn't keep running. They had to fight back. They moved cautiously through the auto shop, keeping low, their eyes darting between shadows. The only sound was the distant hum of the broken fluorescent lights. The garage smelled of rust and gasoline, the air thick with tension. Lucian motioned for Cormac to follow as they crept toward the back exit. He pressed his back against the wall and peeked outside. The alley was empty. Too empty. Cormac swallowed hard. This feels like a trap. Lucian smirked. It is. Before Cormac could question him, Lucian stepped outside. He stood in the alley, completely exposed, his hands by his sides. Cormac's heart nearly stopped. Lucian. Lucian lifted his phone and snapped a picture of himself. Then, without hesitation, he sent it to No Face Snap. Come get me. Cormac's blood ran cold. What the hell are you doing? Lucian didn't answer. He just stared at his phone, waiting. Then, BZZZT. A message. Cormac peered over Lucian's shoulder. Already here. His breath caught. Slowly, he turned, scanning the alley. Nothing. Then, a whisper of movement. Cormac barely had time to react before Lucian shoved him backward. A figure lunged from the shadows, fast, almost inhumanly so. The masked stalker's hand reached for Lucian, but he twisted away just in time. Lucian struck, his knife flashing in the dim light. The blade sliced through fabric, and the figure recoiled. A strangled sound escaped from behind the mask. Cormac scrambled to his feet, his adrenaline spiking. Get them! Lucian charged, tackling the figure to the ground. The two struggled, limbs tangled, rolling across the pavement. Lucian fought with raw aggression, his fists slamming against the mask. Crack! The mask splintered. The figure let out a sharp gasp, shoving Lucian away with unnatural strength. They stumbled backward, clutching their face. Cormac caught a glimpse of pale skin beneath the broken mask. Lucian pushed himself up, panting. Take it off, he growled. Cormac felt the air shift, the moment stretching impossibly long. The figure hesitated. Then, with a slow, trembling motion, they reached up and peeled away the remains of the mask. Cormac's vision blurred for a second, his brain refusing to comprehend what he was seeing. The person standing before them had his face. Identical. Cormac's stomach twisted violently. His own eyes stared back at him, his own features distorted by the dim light. It wasn't possible. It wasn't real. Lucian tensed, his knife still gripped tight. What the hell? The doppelganger smiled. Then Cormac's phone buzzed. His hands shook as he looked down at the screen. A new snap from No Face Snap. He opened it, his fingers numb. A video played. It was him. Not in the alley. Not with Lucian. It was him, sitting in his apartment. Right now. Staring into the camera. Then, the Cormac in the video lifted a hand. And waved. Cormac's breath came in ragged gasps. He looked up, his body cold with fear. His doppelganger tilted its head and whispered, "I told you. I've been here the whole time." The world spun. Cormac staggered back, his heartbeat a deafening roar in his ears. Lucian's expression darkened, his body tense with shock. Then the doppelganger did something even worse. It pulled out a phone. The screen lit up. Lucian cursed. "Cormac, don't look." But it was too late. Cormac's phone buzzed one last time. "You're already home." Then the screen turned black. And the world around him did too. The alley seemed to shrink around them. The cold air pressed against Cormac's skin, but he barely felt it. His mind reeled as he stared at the doppelganger. At himself. It wasn't possible. Yet there it was, standing just feet away, wearing his face like a mask. Lucian took a step forward, his grip on the knife tightening. "What the hell are you?" The doppelganger smiled, Cormac's smile. But there was something unnatural about it. Too perfect. Too controlled. "I've been here the whole time," it said again, voice eerily calm. "You just never noticed." Cormac's stomach twisted. His phone was still dark, the last message burning in his mind. "You're already home." Lucian's muscles tensed. "You're lying." The thing tilted its head. "Am I?" Then it lifted its phone. "BZZZT." Cormac's phone vibrated violently in his hand. He nearly dropped it. Slowly, hesitantly, he turned the screen toward himself. A new video. He pressed play. The footage was dark at first, then cleared. It showed his apartment. The dim glow of the kitchen light, the unmade bed, the window cracked slightly open. Then the camera turned, and there he was, sitting on his bed. Cormac's pulse spiked. The person in the video, him, lifted his phone and pointed the camera at the screen, showing the live footage back to them, a perfect loop. Lucian muttered under his breath, stepping in front of Cormac. "Turn it off." Cormac's fingers fumbled on the screen, but it wouldn't close. The video continued, distorting, the figure on the screen smiling wider, too wide. Then the Cormac in the video whispered something. "Come home." The screen glitched. Then the video feed cut to black. Cormac gasped, staggering backward. His pulse roared in his ears. "No, this isn't real." The doppelganger stepped forward, still holding the phone, its face perfectly mirroring his. "It's real, Cormac. You've just been living in the wrong place." Lucian lunged. His knife slashed through the air, aiming straight for the thing's chest. But before the blade could connect, the doppelganger vanished. A rush of air passed them, like something unseen had just moved. Lucian swore. "Where?" Then Cormac felt it, something cold against his neck. His own breath hitched. Lucian's eyes widened in horror. "Cormac, don't move." Cormac didn't dare breathe. The sensation on his skin wasn't hands, wasn't solid. It was like a presence, something unseen but undeniably there. A pressure against his throat. Then he heard the whisper, right in his ear. "You've been looking in the wrong mirror." The streetlights above them flickered violently. A sharp crack echoed through the alley. The world lurched. When Cormac opened his eyes, everything was different. He was standing in his apartment. But something was wrong. The lights were dimmer, the air heavier. The walls seemed stretched, the furniture slightly out of place, as if everything had been moved just an inch. His breath caught. "Lucian!" Silence. He spun, scanning the apartment. His phone buzzed in his pocket. Dread crawled up his spine as he slowly pulled it out. A new message. From Lucian. His shaking hands tapped it open. "Cormac, where are you?" Cormac's pulse spiked. He typed back quickly. "I'm in the apartment." "Where are you?" 3 dots appeared. Then a response. "No, you're not. I'm in your apartment." Cormac's breath hitched. Before he could reply, another message appeared. "Get out of there. Now." Cormac swallowed hard. His body felt frozen, his mind racing. He turned toward the door, heart hammering. Then, a sound. A soft exhale. Coming from behind him. Slowly, painfully slowly, Cormac turned his head toward the mirror above the dresser. His reflection wasn't moving. It was staring at him, smiling. Cormac's breath came in short, shallow gasps. His body felt paralyzed, every nerve screaming at him to move, to run, but he couldn't. His reflection wasn't just staring. It was smiling. Slowly, its head tilted, just slightly, to the side as if studying him. But Cormac hadn't moved. His hands were clenched at his sides, his breathing ragged, his pulse erratic. Yet the thing in the mirror remained perfectly still. except for its lips curling into that grotesque, knowing grin. Bzzzt. His phone vibrated violently in his hand, nearly making him drop it. A new message. From Lucian. Cormac's shaking fingers barely managed to tap the screen. Cormac, it's not your apartment. Get out. Now. His stomach clenched, his knees weak. He turned toward the door, his entire body screaming at him to move. But just as his fingers brushed the doorknob, thud, the mirror shook violently. Cormac snapped his head back. His reflection was gone. No, not gone. It was standing behind him. Cormac choked on a breath, spinning wildly, but there was nothing there. Just empty space. He turned back to the mirror, his heart hammering. The reflection still stood there, watching him from the other side of the glass. His own voice, distorted, hollow, whispered from the mirror. You've been here before. Cormac stumbled backward, slamming into the dresser. What the hell are you? The reflection stepped forward, pressing its hands against the inside of the mirror, as if testing the barrier between them. Bzzzt. Cormac's phone buzzed again, another frantic message from Lucian. Don't talk to it. Cormac's breath hitched. His pulse roared in his ears. The reflection's smile widened, but its lips didn't move when it spoke. You were never supposed to leave. Cormac's vision blurred. His hands felt numb. The walls around him felt too close, too wrong. The reflection pressed its face closer to the glass, eyes locked onto his. Come back. The lights flickered. The air turned ice cold. And then, the mirror shattered. A deafening silence followed. Tiny shards of glass rained down onto the wooden floor, glinting like jagged stars. Cormac's breath came in uneven gasps. He barely registered that his feet were bleeding, that his hands were trembling. His mind reeled. His reflection was gone. Not just from the broken mirror. Gone, like it had never existed at all. His phone vibrated in his pocket, making him flinch. With shaking hands, he lifted it. Lucian calling. He answered immediately. Lucian. Cormac, listen to me. I don't know where you are, but you're not in your apartment. You have to get out, right now. Cormac swallowed, his throat dry. I don't. He turned in a frantic circle, trying to find anything that felt real. The furniture, the walls, the door. They all looked like his apartment. But somehow they weren't. I don't know how to leave, he whispered. Lucian cursed under his breath. There has to be a way. Try the door. Cormac rushed toward it, grasping the knob. It felt wrong, too cold, too smooth, like it wasn't really there. His fingers shook as he twisted it. The door swung open, but it didn't lead to the hallway. It led nowhere. Just darkness. Endless, suffocating darkness. A deep, distant hum resonated from the void, like something was breathing. Waiting. Cormac stumbled back. Lucian. Cormac, don't go through it, Lucian barked. Find another way. A window, anything. Cormac spun toward the window. It was still there, but something was outside it. A figure. Standing completely still. It was his reflection. Cormac's stomach lurched. His vision blurred at the edges, his body trembling. The reflection, the other him, was watching him from outside the glass, standing on nothing, as if the laws of reality didn't apply. Then it moved. It lifted a hand. It pointed at him, and smiled. Bzzzt. Another message. Cormac barely had the strength to look. From No Face Snap. You're almost home. Then, his reflection stepped through the window. Cormac's breath left his body in a silent scream. His reflection had stepped through the window, but the glass hadn't shattered. It had passed through the barrier as if it wasn't even there, as if the glass had never been a boundary at all. The other him stood just a few feet away now, inside the room, watching. Its expression was wrong. The smile stretched just a little too wide, the eyes just a little too dark, the movements just a little too smooth. Not human. Cormac stumbled backward, his legs nearly giving out. This isn't real. This isn't real. The doppelganger tilted its head, that twisted smile never fading. But it is. Cormac's phone buzzed violently in his hand. He barely had the strength to look, but he forced himself to. A new message. From No Face Snap. Let's switch places. Cormac's stomach twisted into a tight knot. No, he whispered. No. The doppelganger took a slow step forward. Cormac took a step back. Lucian's voice was in his ear, still on the call. Cormac, talk to me. What's happening? Cormac barely had the breath to answer. It's here. Lucian cursed. Get away from it. Find another way out. There is no way out, Cormac choked. His eyes darted around the room, if it even was a room anymore. The walls felt thinner, like they weren't fully solid. The door still led into endless blackness. And the thing wearing his face was still moving toward him. Then, BZZZT. Another message. Cormac's grip on his phone tightened. His fingers trembled as he opened it. A photo. Of him. But something was wrong. He was standing exactly where he was now, but in the image his face was empty. No eyes. No mouth. Just smooth, blank skin where his features should have been. A new message appeared. Time to go. Cormac's vision blurred. A ringing sound filled his ears. The walls were flickering now, glitching, like reality itself was starting to come apart. Lucian's voice cut through the static. Cormac, listen to me. You're still here. You're still real. Don't let it take you. The doppelganger was inches away now. Cormac could feel its presence, cold and hollow, like it was sucking the air out of the room. It raised a hand, reached toward him. Lucian's voice was frantic. Cormac, fight it. Cormac's chest tightened. The room around him flickered again. It was pulling him in, pulling him to the other side. His grip on the phone was the only thing grounding him. The phone. His stomach twisted violently. The phone. If this had started on Snapchat, if it had followed him through photos, videos, messages, then maybe that was the key. Maybe he could turn it against itself. The doppelganger reached for him. Cormac snapped a picture. Flash. The camera captured the moment in a split second, illuminating the room in a harsh white glow. The doppelganger screamed. The sound was inhuman, a glitching, warped distortion that made Cormac's skull feel like it was splitting in two. The image on his screen twisted violently. The thing wearing his face convulsed, its features warping, flickering like a corrupted file. The walls shuddered. The floor beneath him cracked. The entire world broke apart. And then, everything went dark. Cormac woke up on the floor of the auto shop. Lucian was shaking him, his face tight with panic. Cormac! Cormac, wake the hell up! Cormac gasped, sitting up so fast his head spun. His body ached. His hands were freezing. Lucian exhaled, relief flashing across his face. Jesus! I thought I lost you. Cormac's breath came out in short, sharp bursts. He looked around. They were back. Back in the real world. Lucian's grip on his shoulders was firm. What the hell happened? Cormac swallowed, his throat dry. His mind was still catching up, still trying to process everything. His phone vibrated one last time. He didn't want to look, but he had to. A new notification. A message from No Face Snap. Cormac's blood ran cold as he read it. We'll try again later. His stomach twisted. His hands clenched into fists. Lucian saw the look on his face. Is it over? Cormac slowly locked his phone and put it face down on the ground. He exhaled shakily, staring at the flickering overhead light. I don't think it ever will be. Reeve had never been the paranoid type. Snapchat was just another app, a way to keep in touch, send dumb pictures, and watch stories of people he barely spoke to. He never thought twice about who viewed his posts or who added him, until he got the request. It happened on an otherwise uneventful Thursday night. Reeve was sprawled on his bed, aimlessly scrolling through his phone when the notification popped up. New friend request from Abigail Gray 23. He frowned. The name wasn't familiar. He tapped on the profile. No Bitmoji. No display picture. No snap score. Just a blank profile. Reeve hesitated for a second. He wasn't the type to add random people, but maybe it was someone he knew from school with a new account, or maybe a friend of a friend. Without thinking much of it, he accepted. BZZZT. Instantly, a new message appeared. Abigail Gray 23. Hey. Reeve raised an eyebrow. That was fast. He typed back. Reeve, hey. Do I know you? No response. He waited a few minutes, watching as the delivered notification sat there unread. Shrugging it off, he locked his phone and turned his attention back to the movie playing in the background. An hour later, his phone buzzed again. Abigail, Gray 23 is typing. Reeve sat up. He watched the typing bubble flicker in and out for a long moment before a message finally came through. Abigail Gray 23. Do you remember me? His brow furrowed. That was vague. Reeve, should I? Another long pause. Abigail Gray 23. You used to. A strange chill ran down his spine. Reeve frowned and tapped on the account again. No mutual friends. No updates. Nothing. Something about it felt off. Reeve. Sorry, I think you have the wrong person. No response. After a few minutes, Reeve sighed and put his phone down. Probably just someone messing around. But just as he was about to turn over and sleep, BZZZT. A new message. A picture. Reeve's stomach twisted as he opened it. It was a grainy, dark photo. Hard to make out at first. But then his breath caught in his throat. The picture was of him, lying in bed. Right now. His phone nearly slipped from his fingers. He sat up, heart pounding, and frantically looked around his room. The door was shut. The window locked. He was completely alone. His fingers trembled as he typed. Reeve. Who the hell are you? 3 dots appeared. Then, Abigail, Gray 23 is typing. Reeve's hands shook as he stared at his phone screen. The typing bubble flickered in and out, as if whoever or whatever was on the other side was hesitating. Then, finally, a message appeared. Abigail, Gray 23. I miss you. A sick feeling curled in his stomach. His fingers hovered over the keyboard before he typed back. Reeve. Who are you? How did you take that picture? No response. A cold sweat trickled down his back. He glanced around his darkened bedroom, scanning the corners, the closet, the small space beneath his desk. Nothing. His window was still locked. The door shut. The lights from his laptop cast faint blue shadows against the walls. He was alone, wasn't he? His phone buzzed again. Another picture. Reeve's breath hitched as he opened it. This time it was clearer. It was his window. From the outside, Reeve scrambled out of bed, nearly tripping over his own feet as he rushed to the window. His heart pounded as he yanked the curtains back. Nothing. Just the quiet street below, bathed in dim orange light from the flickering street lamp. The air was still. No movement. No sign of anyone standing outside. His pulse throbbed against his temples. He turned back to his phone and typed with unsteady fingers. Reeve, this isn't funny. Who is this? Abigail, Gray 23 is typing. The response came almost immediately. Abigail, Gray 23. You let me in before. Reeve's breath caught in his throat. Before? A deep, nagging fear uncoiled in his chest. He didn't know anyone named Abigail. No past relationships, no forgotten friendships. So why did this feel familiar? His phone vibrated again. Another image. This time it was a screenshot. A Snapchat memory. Reeve's stomach dropped. The image was old, from over a year ago. It showed a blurry photo of him and some friends, laughing at a house party. But something was wrong. There was someone standing in the background. A girl, just barely visible in the shadows behind them, her face half obscured. Her head was tilted slightly, her body positioned in a way that suggested she wasn't supposed to be there. Reeve didn't remember seeing her that night. He didn't remember her at all. His phone buzzed again. Abigail, Gray 23. You took that picture. You just don't remember. A cold shiver ran down his spine. He scrolled through his Snapchat memories frantically, trying to find the original photo. But it wasn't there. He swore under his breath, hands clammy as he wiped them on his sheets. How did she have a picture from his account that he couldn't even find? The screen flickered. Another message. Abigail, Gray 23. I remember everything. Reeve's stomach twisted. His instincts screamed at him to block the account, to delete Snapchat, to throw his phone across the room and pretend this wasn't happening. But his fingers stayed frozen, because something about this felt unfinished. Then, a video. Reeve hesitated, his chest tightening. He didn't want to open it. He opened it anyway. The screen was dark at first. Just the sound of faint, distorted breathing. Then, slowly, the camera adjusted. It was showing his room. Right now. The same dim blue light from his laptop. The crumpled sheets on his bed. The pile of clothes he had meant to put away. But something was different. The closet door was slightly open. Reeve's heart slammed against his ribs. He turned, his breath coming in short gasps. The closet door was closed. His eyes flicked back to the video. The door in the footage creaked open a little more. A pair of pale fingers curled around the edge of the doorframe. Reeve threw his phone down and lunged for his closet, yanking it open. Empty. His breath came in ragged gasps. His hands shook as he stepped back. Then he heard it. A whisper. Right behind him. I'm already inside. Reeve spun around so fast he nearly lost his balance. But the room was empty. No one was there. His heart pounded against his ribs. The whisper had been real, close enough that he had felt the breath of it against his skin. His fingers trembled as he grabbed his phone from the bed. The Snapchat video had ended, but the screen still showed the last frame. The closet door slightly open, the fingers curling around the edge. Except that hadn't happened. Had it? His head felt light, his vision tunneling as his mind struggled to process everything. Someone was messing with him. They had to be. He forced himself to type, "Reeve, what do you want?" No response. His thumb hovered over the block button, but something stopped him. The message bubble appeared again. "Abigail, Gray 23 is typing." His breath hitched as he waited, eyes flicking back toward the closet, just to make sure. Then the response appeared. "Abigail, Gray 23. Do you remember yet?" Reeve clenched his jaw, frustration bubbling beneath his fear. "Reeve, remember what?" No answer. No typing bubble. He let out a shaky breath, running a hand through his hair. His body was tense, his muscles coiled so tightly it hurt. He needed to get out of here, get some air, think clearly. Without hesitation, he grabbed his jacket and bolted out of his room, his heart still hammering as he slammed the door shut behind him. The silence of his apartment felt too heavy, too wrong. His phone buzzed again. A new picture. He swallowed hard and opened it. It was his door. From the inside, Reeve's blood ran cold. He rushed out of the apartment building, barely remembering to lock the door behind him. The cold night air hit him like a slap, clearing some of the fog in his head. He walked fast, hands stuffed into his jacket pockets, his breath coming in quick bursts. His phone buzzed again. He didn't want to look. He looked anyway. Another message. "Abigail, Gray 23. Running won't help." Reeve gritted his teeth, his panic twisting into anger. His fingers flew over the keyboard. "Reeve, who are you?" 3 dots appeared. "Abigail, Gray 23. Look up." A heavy weight settled in his stomach. Slowly, he lifted his head. Across the street, under the flickering street lamp, stood a figure. Motionless. Watching him. Reeve's chest tightened. The figure was just out of reach of the light, shrouded in shadows, but he could tell it was facing him directly. His pulse roared in his ears. He couldn't make out any details. No facial features, no defining clothes. Just a dark shape, still as death. His phone buzzed again. A picture. His hands shook as he opened it. The image was blurry, but clear enough. It was the street, the sidewalk, and him. The picture had been taken from behind. Reeve's body went cold. He spun on his heel, eyes darting around, searching for whoever had taken the photo. Nothing. But he could feel it now, that unnatural weight in the air, the static-charged sensation of being watched. His phone vibrated one last time. A message. "Abigail, Gray 23. I'm getting closer." Reeve turned back toward the street lamp. The figure was gone. Reeve's breath came in short, ragged bursts. His heart pounded against his ribs as he scanned the empty street. The figure was gone, but he knew it was still there. Somewhere. Watching. His phone felt like dead weight in his hand, the screen still glowing from the last message. "I'm getting closer." He swallowed hard, forcing himself to move. He needed to get away from here. Somewhere public. Somewhere safe. His legs carried him down the sidewalk at a brisk pace, his ears straining for any sound out of place. The streetlights buzzed overhead, flickering occasionally, casting long, stretched-out shadows that moved just enough to make him question what he was seeing. A cold breeze slid through the night, carrying with it a faint whisper. Too soft to make out, too close to ignore. His grip on his phone tightened. He passed an all-night diner up ahead and made a split-second decision. He yanked open the door and stepped inside, the warm air hitting his face like a shock. The scent of coffee and greasy food filled his nostrils, grounding him just enough. A tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "Sit anywhere." Reeve nodded and made his way to the back, choosing a booth near the window. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, his face pale and tense. He rubbed his hands together, trying to shake the lingering chill from his skin. His phone vibrated. His stomach twisted as he lifted it. Another picture. This time it wasn't of him. It was the diner, taken from outside. Reeve's blood ran cold. His eyes snapped up, scanning the street through the window. The sidewalk was empty. He sucked in a shaky breath, his pulse hammering. This wasn't a prank. Someone was following him. His hands hovered over the keyboard. He had half a mind to block the account, to shut off his phone, delete the app, pretend this wasn't happening. But deep down, he knew it wouldn't matter. So instead, he typed, "Reeve, what do you want from me?" The response was immediate. "Abigail, Gray 23. To help you remember." Reeve's fingers clenched into a fist. "Remember what?" he muttered under his breath as he typed the same question. The typing bubble flickered in and out. Then, "Abigail, Gray 23. You were there that night." Reeve's skin prickled. His mind raced, but nothing came. "What night?" "Reeve, I don't know what you're talking about." No answer. Then, another picture. Reeve hesitated before opening it. The image was dark and blurry, but his gut clenched in recognition. It was an old road. Worn pavement. A guardrail twisted out of shape, like something had hit it at high speed. His chest tightened as he stared at it, his head suddenly pounding. His own voice whispered in the back of his mind. "You were there." Reeve swallowed hard, his body going rigid. This place was familiar, and that terrified him. His phone vibrated again. "Abigail, Gray 23. You left me there." Reeve felt his stomach drop. He forced himself to type, though his fingers felt numb. "Reeve, who are you?" The reply came instantly. "Abigail, Gray 23. You already know." Reeve's hands shook as memories started surfacing, fragments, flashes. A road wet with rain, headlights in the rearview mirror. A scream. The diner suddenly felt too small. The walls too tight. The air too thin. BZZZT. Another message. "Abigail, Gray 23. Check your camera roll." Reeve's fingers trembled as he hesitated, then swiped over to his gallery. He scrolled through his saved pictures, his pulse erratic. At first, nothing seemed out of place. Random photos, memes, old conversations. Then he saw it. A video. Dated over a year ago. But he didn't remember taking it. His breath hitched as he tapped on it, his fingers ice cold. The screen flickered to life. The footage was grainy, filmed at night. The camera panned over wet pavement, over shattered glass. Over blood. Reeve's stomach lurched. Then the camera turned. It was pointing at someone. A girl, lying motionless on the ground. The reflection of headlights gleamed in the distance, illuminating her pale skin, her unmoving chest. Then a voice, his own voice. "She's dead." Reeve's breath came in sharp gasps. His fingers fumbled to pause the video, his vision swimming. No. What had he done? His phone buzzed one last time. "Abigail, Gray 23. Now do you remember?" Reeve's world tilted. His vision blurred, his breath came in shallow gasps. The diner, the flickering neon lights, the hum of conversation around him, it all faded into the background. The only thing that existed was the phone in his shaking hands. The video, the girl, the blood, his voice. "She's dead." No. His stomach twisted violently, nausea clawing at his throat. This wasn't real. It couldn't be real. He would have remembered this. Wouldn't he? His fingers trembled as he typed. "Reeve, this is fake." BZZZT. A new message appeared instantly. "Abigail, Gray 23. Is it?" Reeve's head pounded. His mind raced, trying to piece together fragments of a night he didn't remember. The road in the video looked familiar, but his brain refused to connect the dots. His hands were clammy as he scrolled back to the video, pressing play again. The footage continued. The girl lay motionless, her dark hair splayed across the pavement. Then something shifted in the frame, a hand. Reeve's breath hitched. Someone else was there. Someone was filming this. The camera panned up, capturing a figure standing in the rain. Their back was turned to the camera, their body stiff. Then they turned. Reeve's stomach dropped. It was him, soaked in rain, his clothes damp and wrinkled. His face pale, eyes wide, full of panic, staring directly at the camera. A single phrase escaped his lips in the video. "We have to go." Reeve slapped his hand over his mouth, while rising in his throat. No. His vision blurred as reality twisted around him. His breath came in sharp bursts, the air feeling too thin. His phone vibrated again. "Abigail, Gray 23. You left me there." Reeve's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white. He forced himself to type. "Reeve, who are you?" The typing bubble flickered. Then, "Abigail, Gray 23. I was your friend. Reeves' hands clenched into fists. His thoughts spiraled. This wasn't possible. He would have remembered something this big. He would have remembered a girl dying. Wouldn't he? Another message appeared. Abigail, Gray 23. Check the news. May 17th, hit and run. His stomach turned. His fingers moved on their own, swiping to open his browser. He hesitated. Part of him didn't want to know. But he had to. He typed in the date. Local accident. The search results loaded. His blood turned to ice. Local student killed in hit and run, driver never found. Reeves' throat tightened as he clicked the article. His pulse roared in his ears as he scrolled down, feeling like the air had been sucked from his lungs. Victim, Abigail Gray 19. A girl with dark hair. A bright smile. A familiar face. Reeves' grip on his phone faltered. The room tilted. His heartbeat thudded, each beat louder than the last. His phone buzzed again. Abigail Gray 23. You left me there. His stomach lurched. He shot out of the booth, chair scraping loudly against the floor. The waitress glanced up, startled, but he barely registered it. He needed to get out. He needed air. The moment he stepped outside, the cold hit him like a punch. He stumbled onto the sidewalk, dragging in deep, uneven breaths. His head swam, his thoughts crashing into one another. This couldn't be real. Then his phone buzzed again. Another picture. Reeve braced himself as he opened it, his pulse hammering. It was the diner, taken from across the street. The sidewalk where he stood. The very spot he was standing in. His chest clenched as he slowly turned his head. There, standing in the shadows of a nearby alley, was someone watching him. The figure was still. Too still. His phone vibrated again. Abigail Gray 23. You can't run from the past. Reeves' breath hitched as the figure took a slow, deliberate step forward. Another message appeared. I remember everything. Reeves' body refused to move. The figure in the alley was barely visible in the dim light, but he felt its presence pressing against his skin like a weight. It wasn't just someone watching him. It was her. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. His fingers clenched around his phone, as if it were the only thing keeping him tethered to reality. The past wasn't supposed to come back, but it had. The street around him was eerily empty. No cars, no pedestrians, just him and the shadow in the alley. BZZZT. Another message appeared on his screen. Abigail, Gray 23. You don't remember everything yet. Reeves' stomach twisted. He forced himself to type, his hands trembling. Reeve, you're dead. The typing bubble appeared. Abigail, Gray 23. And whose fault is that? A lump formed in his throat. His mind reeled, trying to piece together memories that felt blurred, hazy wrong. The road, the rain, the headlights. His voice in the video. We have to go. Reeves sucked in a sharp breath. He hadn't been alone that night. His phone vibrated again. Another image. His fingers hesitated before opening it. It was a blurry picture of a car interior. His car. The dashboard lights glowed dimly. The windshield was streaked with raindrops. And in the passenger seat, a hand. Reeves' pulse spiked. The angle suggested that he had taken the picture himself, but he didn't remember ever taking it. His chest felt tight. He typed with shaking hands. Reeve. Who else was there that night? A long pause. Then, Abigail Gray 23. You know. His vision swam. No, he didn't. His fingers hovered over the screen, his breathing shallow. He had to get to the truth. Reeve, tell me. For the first time, there was no immediate reply. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished. Then his phone buzzed. A video. His stomach dropped. Another video. He didn't want to press play. He had to. The footage flickered to life. The camera shook as if the person holding it was moving. The road was wet, glistening under streetlights. It was the same road from before, but this time there was sound. A girl's voice, Abigail. Reeve stopped the car. Reeve's blood turned to ice. The camera shifted. He could see himself in the driver's seat, gripping the wheel. His face was pale, panicked. No, his own voice said in the video. No, we can't. A shaky breath. Reeve, please. We have to go back. His grip on the wheel tightened in the video. I can't. The camera jostled, the image blurring. Then, a scream. Loud. Raw. The video cut to black. Reeve's stomach twisted violently. His head pounded. It was real. He had been there. He had been driving. And Abigail. His phone buzzed one last time. A final message. Abigail, Gray 23. Now you remember. Reeve looked up. The figure in the alley was gone, but the street light above him flickered, and a whisper echoed in his ear. You left me. Reeve's breath came in ragged gasps. The whisper still echoed in his ears, a phantom sensation crawling down his spine. The streetlight above him buzzed, flickering like a dying heartbeat. He spun in a frantic circle, searching the dark alley where the figure had stood. But it was empty. Gone. Yet the weight of being watched remained, thick and suffocating. His phone buzzed. BZZZT. BZZZT. 2 messages. Abigail, Gray 23. You can't escape the past. Abigail, Gray 23. You never really left me. Reeve's pulse pounded. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to type. What could he even say? A sudden gust of wind rattled a nearby dumpster, sending an empty can rolling across the pavement. The noise made him jump. This was too much. He needed answers. His feet moved before his brain caught up. He sprinted down the street, away from the diner, away from the alley, away from the ghost of Abigail Gray. 15 minutes later, he stood outside his apartment building, chest heaving. The night air burned his lungs, his fingers still ice-cold despite the sweat clinging to his skin. His thoughts raced. The video. The crash. The fear in his own voice. What had really happened that night? He needed to remember. Reeve yanked open the front door and took the stairs 2 at a time. His apartment was silent when he stepped inside. Too silent. He locked the door behind him, hands shaking, and flicked on every light in the living room. Shadows retreated into the corners, but the air still felt heavy, as if something unseen had followed him inside. His phone vibrated again. A photo. His heart stuttered as he opened it. It was his apartment, taken from inside the room. A fresh wave of nausea hit him. No, that's impossible. He had been alone when he walked in. He was alone. Right. His head snapped up, scanning the room. His breath caught in his throat. The closet door. It was open. His mind screamed at him to run, to get out, to not look. But his body refused to listen. Slowly, he stepped forward, each movement feeling sluggish, like wading through thick water. His hand reached out, fingers trembling as they brushed against the closet door. His phone buzzed. BZZZT. A video. The screen flickered as the footage started playing. The image was shaky, moving through his apartment. His apartment. From inside the closet. The camera was angled through a gap in the door, peering into the living room. Watching. The video played for a few seconds, the footage eerily still. Then movement. Him. Walking through the front door, exhausted, tense. The footage was from just a few minutes ago. The camera followed his every move, tracking him as he locked the door. As he checked his phone. As he stood frozen in terror. Then, the camera tilted downward. A pale, slender hand crept into the frame. A hand that wasn't his. Reeve's body locked up. His mouth went dry. The cold grip of terror clenched around his chest, making it hard to breathe. The video continued. The hand moved toward the closet door from the inside. Reeve barely had time to react before the last frame of the video sent his world crashing down. It showed the inside of the closet, and the words scratched into the wall. Let me out. Reeve staggered backward. His vision blurred, his pulse roaring in his ears. Then, a creaking noise. Not from the phone, from the closet. His breath caught as the door slowly, agonizingly slowly, crept open a few inches wider. Darkness yawned inside, thick and suffocating. And in that darkness, a face. Pale. Wrong. Eyes that weren't eyes, dark voids stretching too wide. A mouth curled into a twisted, unnatural grin. Reeve didn't scream. He couldn't. His body refused to move. His phone buzzed one last time. BZZZT. A final message. Abigail, Gray 23. I'm home. Reeve's body refused to move. The thing in the closet wasn't human. Its face, Abigail's face, was stretched and wrong, like someone had tried to sculpt a memory from wax and let it melt in the heat. Its black, vacant eyes locked onto him, unblinking. Its grin was too wide, too hungry. Reeve's fingers trembled around his phone. The last message still glowed on the screen. I'm home. BZZZT. Another message popped up. Abigail, Gray 23. Aren't you going to let me in? Reeve's stomach lurched. His feet finally obeyed him. stumbling backward as his mind screamed at him to get out, to run, to wake up from whatever nightmare this was. The closet door creaked wider. The thing, Abigail, tilted its head, its hollow gaze tracking his every move. Reeves' back hit the wall. He was trapped. His mind whirled. Think, think, think. He did the only thing he could. He lifted his phone and snapped a picture. Flash! The room lit up for a fraction of a second. When the brightness faded, she was gone. The closet was empty. Reeves' pulse pounded so hard it made him dizzy. He blinked rapidly, his breath coming in ragged gasps. No, that didn't just happen. He forced himself to check his phone. The picture was there, but it wasn't a photo of his closet. It was a picture of him, taken from inside the closet. His phone vibrated violently in his hand. BZZZT. Abigail, Gray 23. That wasn't very nice. BZZZT. Abigail, Gray 23. Try again. A new file appeared. A video. Reeves' throat tightened. He didn't want to watch. He had to watch. With shaking hands, he pressed play. At first, the screen was black. Then, a low static hum filled the speakers. The camera adjusted, revealing a door. His door. The one leading to his bedroom. The video was being filmed from inside the closet. Reeves' breath caught as the footage continued. He saw himself in real time, standing stiffly, clutching his phone with wide, terrified eyes. The video was being recorded right now. He looked up. The closet was still empty. But the door behind him. Click! The doorknob turned. Reeve whipped around just as his bedroom door burst open. The lights flickered violently, throwing shadows across the walls. Cold air rushed in like something unseen had just entered the room. BZZZT. Another message. Abigail, Gray 23. I let myself in. Reeves' breath hitched. He backed away from the open door, but he knew. He wasn't alone anymore. His phone buzzed one last time. BZZZT. A final image appeared on his screen. It was a live snap. The timestamp read now. It was a picture of his room. A picture of him. And standing right behind him was Abigail. Reeves' blood ran ice cold. The picture on his screen, Abigail standing right behind him. His breath caught in his throat as terror ripped through his body. He didn't dare turn around. BZZZT. A message. Abigail, Gray 23. Look at me. Reeves' fingers tightened around his phone. No. Every muscle in his body screamed at him to move, to run, to do anything except turn around. His mind raced through the past few days, the messages, the photos, the videos. She had been leading him here, to this moment. He squeezed his eyes shut. His own voice echoed in his head. You were there that night. You left me. A new memory surfaced, sharp as broken glass. Rain. Headlights. A voice screaming his name. Her voice. BZZZT. Another message. Abigail, Gray 23. I just want to talk. Reeves' chest rose and fell in ragged gasps. His entire body trembled as his thumb hovered over the keyboard. Reeve, you're dead. The typing bubble appeared. Abigail, Gray 23. Yes. Abigail, Gray 23. Because of you. Reeves' stomach twisted violently. A deep nausea clawed at his insides, cold dread gripping his bones. He had done this. The memory played out in flashes. The crash. The blood. His hands gripping the wheel, knuckles white. His voice shaking. We have to go. And then, the door opening. The sound of someone running. Someone leaving her behind. BZZZT. Reeve flinched as another message appeared. Abigail, Gray 23. Do you remember now? His breathing grew ragged. His pulse pounded against his skull. He had spent a year burying this, pretending it didn't happen. But Abigail, she had never forgotten. And now she had come back for him. BZZZT. A live snap appeared. His stomach dropped. The timestamp read now. His fingers shook as he tapped the image. It was a video. The camera was shaky, flickering in and out of focus. The screen showed his reflection. He was staring at his phone, just like he was now. Except, his reflection was moving on its own. The Reeve in the video slowly lifted his head, his expression twisting into something unnatural. A grin stretched across his face, wide, too wide. And then, from the phone's speakers, a voice whispered, Now it's your turn to stay. The lights in his apartment burst. Darkness swallowed him whole. BZZZT. A final message appeared on his phone. Abigail, Gray 23. Goodbye, Reeve. Darkness swallowed Reeves' apartment. His phone flickered in his trembling hands, the screen barely illuminating the suffocating blackness around him. His breath came in short, sharp bursts. This wasn't real. BZZZT. A new message appeared. Abigail Gray 23. It's over. His fingers shook as he typed back, desperation clawing at his chest. Reeve, please. I'm sorry. Silence. No typing bubble. No response. Then his screen glitched. BZZZT. A video. Reeves' stomach clenched as he opened it. The footage was grainy, but he recognized his own bedroom. The camera slowly panned across the room, his bed, his desk, his open closet. Then the view tilted. The camera was lowering, moving toward the floor. Reeves' heart stopped. It was showing his feet. The video was being recorded from right where he was standing. His blood turned to ice. No. BZZZT. Another snap appeared. A live photo. Timestamp now. With shaking hands, Reeve tapped the image. The picture was of his bedroom mirror. At first, nothing seemed off. Then he saw it. His reflection was smiling. But he wasn't. His body froze. His reflection's head tilted slightly, studying him. Then, ever so slowly, the mirrored version of him raised a hand and waved. A strangled breath left Reeves' lips. His reflection wasn't following him anymore. It was watching him. His phone vibrated again, but he was too terrified to look. BZZZT. Then, the mirrored version of him took a step forward. Out of the glass. The screen in his hand cracked. A sudden, sharp pain shot through his skull, like something had reached inside his head and was tearing him apart. His vision blurred, the room twisting violently around him. He collapsed to his knees, his body convulsing as his phone slipped from his grip. Everything flickered, glitched. Then, silence. The next morning, the landlord knocked on Reeves' door. There was no answer. Concerned, he used his key and stepped inside. The apartment was cold, eerily still. The air felt wrong. Everything was exactly as Reeve had left it. His bed was unmade, his phone lay cracked on the floor. His laptop screen flickered, frozen on an unread Snapchat notification. But Reeve was gone. The only thing left was his mirror. And in the reflection, a faint, twisted smile. Caspian wasn't the type to scare easily. Late nights, horror movies, urban legends, none of it ever got under his skin. But something about the way his phone pinged in the middle of the night felt wrong. He stirred in bed, groggy, barely processing the sound. His room was dark except for the faint glow of his laptop screen on the desk. The only noise was the soft hum of the city outside. Then another ping. This time it jolted him fully awake. Caspian groaned, rubbing his eyes as he reached for his phone. The brightness of the screen stung for a moment before the notification came into focus. New Snapchat message from unknown user. His brow furrowed. That wasn't right. Snapchat didn't allow messages from users you hadn't added. Still half asleep, he tapped the notification. The chat was empty. No messages. No saved snaps. Nothing. A slow unease crept into his chest. Had it been a glitch? Maybe he had imagined the notification. But just as he was about to lock his phone and roll back over, BZZZT. Another message. This time an image. Caspian hesitated, then opened it. The picture was blurry, dark. It took him a moment to make out what he was looking at. Then his breath caught in his throat. It was his window, taken from the outside. His heart pounded. He threw off the covers and scrambled toward the window, yanking back the curtain. Nothing. The street was empty. No movement. No sign of anyone standing there, watching. He swallowed hard, his fingers shaking as he typed a reply. Caspian. Who is this? No response. For a long moment, nothing happened. The only sound was the blood rushing in his ears. He stared at the screen, waiting, hoping that this was some sort of joke, some friend messing with him. Then the typing bubble appeared. Slow, deliberate. A message popped up. Unknown user. I see you. Caspian's breath hitched. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure of what to say. Then, a new picture. This time the image was clearer. It was a picture of him, lying in bed, taken seconds ago. A cold, paralyzing terror rooted him to the spot. His hands went numb. No one else was in his apartment. The door was locked. The windows shut. His phone buzzed one last time. A video. His stomach twisted violently, but he tapped the screen. The footage was shaky, moving through his apartment. The perspective was low, like someone was crawling along the floor. The camera crept toward his bed, closer and closer, stopping just beside where he had been lying minutes before. Then the screen glitched. The camera turned upward, and Caspian saw it. A figure, standing in the shadows of his room. The screen cut to black. Then a final message appeared. Unknown user. Check under your bed. Caspian's breath came in shallow, uneven gasps. His eyes remained locked on the last message. Check under your bed. His fingers felt frozen around his phone. His room was dead silent, but his pulse roared in his ears. Was someone in here with him? His instincts screamed at him to run. Get out! But fear held him in place, pinning him to the spot like an invisible force. The air in his room felt heavier, thicker, like something unseen was waiting. He forced himself to move slowly. His muscles were tense as he shifted off the bed, placing his feet carefully on the floor. The wooden planks creaked under his weight, the sound deafening in the silence. His phone buzzed again. BZZZT. Another message. Unknown user. Why are you so slow? Caspian's stomach twisted into knots. He didn't type back. Don't engage. That was the rule for dealing with stalkers, right? Don't react. Don't let them know they've gotten into your head. But this wasn't normal. His throat was dry as he lowered himself to his knees. His fingers trembled as he reached toward the bed frame, hesitating just inches away from the floor. What if something was really under there? Another message popped up on his screen. Unknown user. I'm waiting. Caspian clenched his jaw, steeling himself. He exhaled sharply, then lifted the edge of the bed skirt. The space beneath was dark. Empty. Nothing but discarded socks, dust, and the old shoebox where he kept a few old journals. Relief crashed over him, but it was short-lived. BZZZT. His phone vibrated violently. Another picture. His stomach dropped as he opened it. It was taken from under his bed, a perspective from inside the darkness, looking out. Right at him. His breath caught in his throat. He scrambled backward, nearly knocking over his nightstand in the process. No, that was impossible. His bed was empty. He had just checked. Hadn't he? His fingers fumbled as he typed, his breathing ragged. Caspian. Who are you? How are you doing this? A long pause. The typing bubble appeared, then vanished. Then, a video. His gut clenched, every nerve in his body on high alert. He didn't want to watch it, but his thumb moved on its own, tapping the screen. The footage was dark. The camera was angled upward, capturing the underside of his mattress. The video was filmed from inside the space beneath his bed. Something shifted in the shadows. At first, it was hard to make out, but as the camera adjusted, a shape emerged. A pair of hands, fingers long and thin, pressed against the slats of his bed frame. Caspian's breath hitched. He hadn't seen that when he checked. The hands moved slowly, dragging nails against the wood almost playfully. The camera tilted slightly, and for a brief moment a face appeared. Not human. Dark, sunken eyes. A mouth stretched into something that resembled a grin, but wasn't quite right. The way it moved was unnatural, jittery, like a glitching video. Then the whispering started. Low, distorted. At first, Caspian couldn't make out the words. Then he did. Come closer. The screen glitched violently. The video cut out. His phone buzzed again. Unknown user. You missed me. Caspian shot to his feet, his chest heaving. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't someone hacking his phone for fun. This was something else. Something wrong. His gaze darted back to the bed, his instincts screaming at him to get out. But before he could move, a sound. A low, deliberate scratching. Coming from under the bed. Caspian ran. He didn't stop running until he was outside, his breath sharp and uneven. The night air was cold against his sweat-dampened skin. He stood on the sidewalk, hands on his knees, trying to convince himself he wasn't losing his mind. BZZZT. His phone vibrated again. He hesitated before looking. A new message. Unknown user. Don't think that leaving will help. His stomach turned. Another message. Unknown user. I can follow. Caspian's hands shook. He turned his phone off and shoved it into his pocket, his mind racing. He had to go somewhere safe. Somewhere bright. Somewhere crowded. His legs moved before his brain could catch up, carrying him down the street toward the all-night diner a few blocks away. But as he walked, something gnawed at the back of his mind. A realization he didn't want to acknowledge. If the photos had come from inside his apartment, if the video had been taken from under his bed, then who had been holding the camera? Caspian's feet pounded against the pavement as he moved through the dimly lit streets. The diner wasn't far, just a few blocks away, but every step felt like it took an eternity. His breath was ragged, his mind spiraling. Who had been holding the camera? The thought wouldn't leave him alone. The video had come from under his bed, but when he checked, there was nothing there. His stomach churned. That thing, whatever it was, had been there watching, and now it was following him. His phone was still off, burning a hole in his pocket. He was too afraid to turn it back on. The messages, the pictures, the video. He didn't want to see any more. He needed light. People. Something real. The neon glow of the diner sign finally came into view, flickering against the empty street. Almost there. The bell above the door jingled as he stepped inside. The warmth and the low hum of conversation immediately wrapped around him, anchoring him to reality. A tired-looking waitress glanced up from behind the counter. "Sit anywhere you want, Han." Caspian nodded, his hands still trembling as he slid into the farthest booth, pressing his back against the wall. His fingers drummed nervously on the table as he scanned the room. A couple of late-night workers sat at the counter. A truck driver nursed a coffee in the corner. No one was watching him, but the feeling never left. He reached for his phone, hesitating before pressing the power button. The screen flickered to life. No new notifications. For the first time that night, he felt a small, fragile sense of relief. The waitress walked over, notepad in hand. "What can I get you?" Just coffee," Caspian mumbled, rubbing a hand over his face. He barely heard her reply as she walked away. His pulse was still racing, his body tense. He stared at his reflection in the diner window. His own pale, shaken face stared back. Then his stomach dropped. There was something else in the reflection. A figure just behind him. Caspian whipped around so fast he nearly knocked over the salt shaker. Nothing. The diner was the same. The truck driver. The two workers. No one behind him. But when he turned back to the window, the figure was still there. Closer. His blood ran cold. BZZZT. His phone vibrated violently in his hand. Unknown user. Nice try. Caspian's breath came in sharp gasps. His heart slammed against his ribs. This thing was still playing with him. BZZZT. Another message. Unknown user. Check your camera roll. He didn't want to. He knew what he would find. But his fingers moved on their own. The photo gallery opened. The most recent picture made his stomach lurch. It was a picture of the diner, taken from the outside. Someone was watching him. Right now. He jerked his head toward the window, eyes scanning the street outside. The sidewalk was empty, bathed in the glow of the streetlights. No movement. No figures. No one. Then, his phone buzzed one last time. A video. His fingers trembled as he tapped the screen. The footage was grainy, shaky. The camera moved slowly, walking toward the diner. His heart nearly stopped. This was live. The camera approached the window. Approached him. The last frame of the video showed the window, right behind where he was sitting. Then the screen went black, and the lights in the diner flickered. The diner's lights flickered violently, sending sharp shadows crawling across the walls. A few of the customers glanced up, unconcerned, chalking it up to faulty wiring. But Caspian knew better. His phone buzzed again. BZZZT. Unknown user. You can't hide. His pulse hammered against his ribs. His hands gripped the edge of the table, so hard his knuckles turned white. He forced himself to breathe, to think. What did this thing want? The waitress returned, setting his coffee on the table with a small clink. "Power's been acting weird all week," she muttered, glancing up at the flickering lights before offering a tired smile. "Let me know if you need anything else." Caspian nodded absently, barely registering her words. His eyes darted back to the window, scanning the empty sidewalk outside. No one was there, but that didn't mean he was alone. His phone vibrated again. BZZZT. A new picture. His stomach turned as he opened it. It was the diner, taken from the outside. The picture was darker than the last one, grainy, as if snapped from just beyond the streetlights. His fingers trembled as he zoomed in, and there it was. A figure. standing at the edge of the light, its face just out of view. BZZZT. Unknown user. Come outside. Caspian's breath hitched. No, he wasn't stupid. He wasn't walking into a trap. BZZZT. Another picture. His heart nearly stopped. This time it wasn't of the diner. It was of him, sitting at the booth. Right now, taken from just a few feet away. Cold terror coiled around his spine. He whipped his head around, scanning the diner. No one had their phone up. The truck driver was still hunched over his coffee. The two workers chatting at the counter, the waitress behind the register. But someone in here had taken that picture. His skin crawled. He was being watched. From the inside. He swallowed hard, his mouth dry as he gripped his phone tighter. Caspian. Who are you? The response was immediate. Unknown user. You already know. His fingers hesitated. No, he didn't know. He didn't know anything. And yet, deep down, something inside him stirred. A memory. A feeling. Something half forgotten, lingering at the edges of his mind like a whisper in a dream. BZZZT. A video. His stomach dropped. He didn't want to open it, but he had to. His thumb hovered for only a second before tapping the screen. The footage was dark, shaky. The camera moved through a hallway. His hallway. Caspian's breathing grew shallow as the video continued. The camera crept forward, gliding toward his apartment door. The angle was low, like someone crawling. The screen glitched. The camera tilted up. His apartment door was open. The video ended. BZZZT. Unknown user. You left the door unlocked. Caspian's blood ran cold. No. His heart slammed against his chest. He had locked his door. He had checked. Hadn't he? His hands shook violently as he fumbled for his keys, his mind racing. He had to go home. Had to see for himself. But as he slid out of the booth, his phone buzzed one last time. A final message appeared on his screen. Unknown user. I'll be waiting. Caspian's blood turned to ice. You left the door unlocked. The message stared back at him from his phone screen, the words sinking into his mind like poison. His body felt disconnected, like his brain was struggling to catch up with reality. No, I locked it. His breath hitched. He had locked the door. He was sure of it. BZZZT. Another message. Unknown user. Come home. A wave of nausea twisted in his stomach. His fingers trembled as he typed back. Caspian. Who the hell are you? The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Then a new message. Unknown user. Come see for yourself. His chest tightened. The diner's neon glow felt too dim, too weak against the suffocating dread curling around his ribs. This is a trap, but he had to go back. He had to see. The walk back to his apartment was the longest of his life. Every step felt heavier, each shadow stretching longer than it should. The streets were quiet, almost unnaturally so, like the city itself was holding its breath. His building loomed ahead, its windows dark and empty. Caspian hesitated at the entrance, his fingers clenched around his phone. What if someone was inside? What if they were waiting for him? A gust of wind rattled a nearby street sign. He swallowed hard, his pulse hammering. He had to move. Standing here wouldn't change anything. With a deep breath, he pushed the door open and stepped inside. The hallway was silent. Too silent. His shoes barely made a sound against the floor as he approached his apartment. The closer he got, the heavier the air felt, thick with something unseen. Then he saw it. His door. It was open. Not wide open. Just slightly ajar, like someone had nudged it open and was waiting inside. His fingers dug into his palms. No, I locked it. BZZZT. A new message. Unknown user. Go inside. His breath hitched. His instincts screamed at him to turn around, to run, to call someone, anyone. But instead, his hand reached for the door. Slowly, carefully, he pushed it open the rest of the way. The apartment was dark. No lights. No sound. Just a thick, smothering silence. The faint glow from the streetlights barely illuminated the living room, casting long, eerie shadows along the floor. Caspian's fingers hovered over the light switch. He flicked it on. Nothing happened. His stomach twisted. The power was out, or something had cut it. His phone vibrated violently in his hand. BZZZT. A new picture. He hesitated before opening it. The image loaded slowly. It was his living room, taken from inside the apartment. his hands clenched around his phone. His heart slammed against his ribs as he slowly scanned the darkened room. Nothing. No movement. He took a careful step forward, then another. His breaths were shallow, his ears straining for any sound. BZZZT. Another message. Unknown user. You're not alone. Caspian's body locked up. The air felt charged, electric, like something unseen was standing just behind him, breathing against his neck. His hands shook as he lifted his phone again. BZZZT. A video. His thumb hovered over it. Then, against all logic, he pressed play. The footage was shaky, dimly lit. The camera panned across a familiar room. His room. The angle was low, crawling along the floor. Then it stopped. The camera tilted up. His closet door. Slightly open. A shadow moved inside. Then, the video cut to static. BZZZT. One final message appeared. Unknown user. Look behind you. Caspian's body locked up. His breath hitched, his fingers clenching around his phone as he read the last message. Look behind you. Every nerve in his body screamed at him not to do it. He wasn't sure if he even could. His limbs felt like lead, his muscles frozen in place. The apartment around him was silent, too silent. The air felt heavier, pressing against him like an unseen force. His pulse pounded in his ears as he slowly, painfully slowly, turned his head. The room was empty. Nothing was behind him. Nothing he could see. His shaky breath left his lips in a ragged exhale. Maybe it was just a trick. A cruel game, designed to push him further into paranoia. But his gut told him otherwise. BZZZT. His phone vibrated violently in his hand. A new picture. Caspian's stomach dropped as he tapped it open. It was his back. The image had been taken from just behind him, mere seconds ago. His breath caught in his throat. He whirled around again, faster this time, eyes scanning every dark corner, every shifting shadow. Still nothing. His fingers trembled as he typed. Caspian, where are you? The typing bubble appeared, then disappeared. Then, BZZZT. Another picture. His hands shook as he opened it. It was his reflection. But something was wrong. The Caspian in the mirror wasn't mirroring him. His real self was standing still, frozen in fear. But his reflection was smiling. A slow, unnatural curve of lips that didn't belong to him. That wasn't his face. BZZZT. A video. Caspian hesitated, his breath ragged, before tapping the screen. The footage was dark and shaky. The camera moved through his apartment, gliding toward his bedroom. The angle was low, creeping. The closet door was slightly open, just like in the last video. But this time, something was different. A shadow stood just inside, partially hidden. As the camera got closer, the figure inside the closet tilted its head. Then, it rushed toward the camera. The screen glitched violently. The video cut out. BZZZT. A new message appeared. Unknown user. I'm already inside. Caspian's stomach turned violently. His mind screamed at him to get out now. His fingers scrambled to dial 911, but before he could press the call button, his phone screen went black. BZZZT. Another message appeared, even though his phone was now off. Unknown user. Too late. The closet door behind him creaked open, and something stepped out. The closet door creaked wider. A deep, suffocating dread coiled in his stomach as the air in his apartment grew thick. Heavy. Wrong. His limbs refused to move, even as his instincts screamed at him to run. Every muscle in his body locked as he watched, unable to blink, unable to breathe, unable to do anything. Then it stepped out. A shape. A figure tall and thin, its limbs stretched too long, its movements jerky, unnatural. Caspian's throat tightened as his vision blurred with panic. His mind rejected what he was seeing. This couldn't be real. The thing stood in the darkness of his room, half shrouded in shadow. Its skin, if it could even be called that, was wrong. Pale, too smooth, almost plastic-like. Like something wearing a person's shape, but failing to get it quite right. Then it moved. Its head twitched violently, snapping toward him at an impossible angle. The sound that followed was like bones grinding together. Caspian stumbled backward. His body finally obeyed him, but his legs felt like lead, sluggish, like he was wading through a nightmare he couldn't wake up from. His phone buzzed violently in his shaking hand. BZZZT. A message. Unknown user. You let me out. His breath came in ragged gasps. His fingers trembled as he typed, his brain scrambling for any kind of logic. Caspian, what are you? A long pause. The typing bubble flickered in and out. Then, unknown user. I've been waiting. A chill shot down his spine. Waiting? His grip tightened on his phone as he tried again, his thoughts a chaotic mess. Caspian. For what? BZZZT. A picture. He hesitated before opening it. Dread slithered through his gut like ice. The image loaded slowly. It was his reflection. His own body, standing stiffly in front of the mirror. Except, his reflection wasn't matching him. Caspian barely had time to register it before his phone vibrated again. BZZZT. A new message. Unknown user. For you. Then the lights went out. Total darkness. The silence was absolute. Suffocating. Caspian's breath came in short gasps, his ears straining for any movement. Then, from the pitch-black void of his apartment, a sound. Soft. Wrong. Breathing. Close. His chest locked up. It was in the room with him. A whisper slithered through the dark, barely audible, but slicing straight through his skull. Let me in. His pulse exploded. His fingers scrambled to turn his phone screen back on, to give himself even a sliver of light. Anything. But when the screen flickered to life, his stomach plummeted. The camera was already open. A live video feed. And the image on the screen wasn't his. The camera was recording, but instead of his hands, instead of the phone, the screen showed something else. It was a pair of hands, long fingers stretching toward him through the darkness. Then, his phone snapped off, and the whisper came again, right against his ear. Now it's my turn. Caspian couldn't breathe. The whisper had been right against his ear. Too close. Too real. His body refused to move, paralyzed by sheer, unfiltered terror. The darkness of his apartment pressed in around him, heavy and suffocating. His phone screen had gone dead, leaving him blind to whatever was standing in the room with him. And then, a sound. Soft. Wet. Like lips stretching into a grin. His pulse pounded against his ribs. He squeezed his eyes shut, willing himself to wake up, to force his body into action. But he couldn't. The whisper came again. Don't fight it. Then, a hand touched his shoulder. Caspian's body exploded into action. He screamed. He twisted violently, shoving himself backward, scrambling toward the nearest source of light, his bedroom window. The curtains were drawn, but a faint glow from the street lamp outside barely illuminated the room. It wasn't much, but it was enough to see that. He was alone. His chest rose and fell in rapid, erratic gasps. His body shook violently, his muscles tight with panic. He grabbed his phone, frantically mashing the power button. The screen flickered back on, the dim glow burning into his retinas. BZZZT. A message. Unknown user. Why did you run? His stomach clenched. No. BZZZT. Another message. Unknown user. I was almost finished. His trembling hands struggled to type. Caspian. What are you? The typing bubble appeared. Then, BZZZT. A photo. Caspian hesitated, every fiber of his being screaming at him not to open it. But his fingers disobeyed him. The image loaded. It was his room, taken from his doorway. Right now. But something was wrong. His bed was visible. His desk. His open closet door. But he was in the picture, standing by the window, holding his phone, exactly how he was standing right now. Caspian's breath left him in a violent shudder. How? Who had taken this? Who was standing in the doorway? BZZZT. A video. His entire body screamed at him not to press play. He pressed play. The footage was static at first, then cleared. It was his reflection. He was looking into his bedroom mirror. But the reflection wasn't moving like him. The Caspian in the mirror lifted his hand. Caspian didn't. The reflection smiled. Then, it stepped out of the mirror. The video glitched violently, the screen warping into streaks of static before it cut to black. BZZZT. A final message appeared. Unknown user. You don't need to fight anymore. Caspian's stomach churned as he slowly, painfully slowly, turned his head toward the mirror. His reflection was smiling, and then it blinked. Caspian's breath came in sharp, shallow gasps. His reflection was smiling, but he wasn't. His entire body locked up as a wave of nausea crawled up his throat. The thing in the mirror wasn't just watching him. It was waiting. Then it moved. Not a natural movement, not a twitch or shift like a normal reflection. It stepped forward. Caspian's heart slammed against his ribs. His own legs were frozen in place, but his reflection took a slow, deliberate step toward the glass. The mirror rippled. Bzzzt. His phone vibrated violently in his hand. His fingers fumbled as he lifted it, barely able to hold it steady. Unknown user. Let's switch. No, Caspian choked out. His voice barely worked, raw with panic. Bzzzt. Another message. Unknown user. It's your turn. His mind screamed at him to run, to throw his phone, to smash the mirror into 1,000 pieces. But he couldn't move. The reflection lifted a hand. Its fingers pressed against the glass, testing the surface like it was pushing against water. Then, a crack splintered across the mirror. Caspian flinched as a spiderweb of fractures snaked outward from the reflection's palm, spreading like veins. The sound of breaking glass filled the room. His phone buzzed again. Bzzzt. A video. Caspian hesitated, his breath ragged, but his trembling hands opened it anyway. The footage was dark, shaky. The camera moved through his apartment. The angle was wrong. It was filmed from inside the mirror. His stomach dropped. He could see himself, standing, staring, frozen in terror. Then, the camera tilted down, at another Caspian, lying on the other side of the mirror, banging against the glass, screaming. The Caspian in the video was clawing, pounding against the surface, his mouth open in a silent, desperate plea. Bzzzt. A final message. Unknown user. Come home. The mirror shattered, and the lights in the apartment went out. Caspian's world plunged into darkness. The moment the mirror shattered, every light in the apartment died, leaving only the eerie glow of his phone screen as his lifeline. His breath came in quick, shallow gasps. His body refused to move. He could still hear the glass breaking, but there was no impact, no shards hitting the floor. Like the mirror hadn't broken at all. Bzzzt. His phone vibrated again. His trembling hands lifted it, the blue-white glow illuminating his face. A new picture. Caspian's stomach twisted violently as he tapped it open. It was a picture of his room. But something was wrong. The furniture was slightly off, just enough to be noticeable. The shadows in the corners of the room were too deep, stretching unnaturally long. And then he saw it. Himself. Standing in the doorway. The Caspian in the photo was grinning, his head tilted slightly to the side. Not him. Bzzzt. Another message. Unknown user. I told you. It's your turn. A wave of nausea washed over him. His heartbeat was erratic, panic clawing at his chest. No, this isn't real. Then, the shadows in the corners of his apartment began to move. Caspian ran. His feet barely touched the ground as he sprinted toward the front door, fumbling with the lock. His fingers were slick with sweat, trembling so hard he could barely grasp the handle. It wouldn't budge. The door wouldn't open. His breath came in ragged, desperate gasps. He yanked and twisted at the knob, but it wouldn't move. Like it wasn't even a door anymore. Bzzzt. A new notification. He hesitated, his gut twisting with dread, but he looked. A video. The footage was shaky, dark. The camera was moving toward the mirror. Except, the mirror wasn't broken. It was still whole. And in the reflection, Caspian saw himself. On the other side, trapped, pounding on the glass. His mouth was open, screaming, but no sound came through. The Caspian in the real world lifted a hand, flexing his fingers. Then, slowly, he reached for the phone. Bzzzt. One last message. Unknown user. Goodbye. Then the screen glitched violently, and Caspian felt something pull him backward. When the lights came back on, the apartment was silent. The mirror was whole, unbroken. The phone on the floor buzzed once. A new Snapchat notification appeared. Caspian. Owen has joined the chat. Caspian opened his eyes. Something was wrong. His apartment looked the same. His bed, his desk, his phone lying on the floor where he had dropped it. The lights were on, the air felt still. But everything was slightly off. The colors were muted, the shadows too deep. The walls stretched higher than before, the furniture subtly out of place, like someone had tried to recreate his home from memory, but failed. Then he heard it, a faint tapping. He turned toward the mirror, and froze. His reflection was there, but it wasn't moving. Caspian's breath hitched. He lifted a trembling hand. The reflection didn't. Then it smiled. BZZZT. His phone buzzed from the floor. His heart pounded as he reached for it, his fingers barely able to hold steady as he lifted the screen. A message. From Caspian Owen. BZZZT. A picture. His stomach twisted violently as he opened it. It was his apartment, but from the other side of the mirror. BZZZT. A video. His thumb hovered over the screen. No, he shouldn't watch it. But he had to. He pressed play. The footage was grainy, flickering in and out. The camera panned across his room. His real room. The version of him in the mirror, his reflection, was holding the phone. Then slowly the camera turned toward the mirror. Caspian saw himself. Trapped. On the other side of the glass, pounding against it, screaming. But no sound came through. His reflection raised its free hand and placed it against the mirror. BZZZT. A message appeared. Caspian, Owen, you don't need this anymore. Before he could react, his phone's screen glitched violently. The text blurred and distorted, the screen flickering. His grip tightened around the device, panic clawing at his chest. Then, the screen went black. His reflection tilted its head, studying him. It lifted a hand and waved. Then, the lights went out. The next morning, Caspian's landlord knocked on his door. No answer. Concerned, he used his key to open the apartment. The place was eerily still. The air felt heavy, stagnant, as if no one had been inside for a long time. The landlord frowned, stepping inside cautiously. Everything was in place, except for the mirror. A large, floor-length mirror stood perfectly centered in the room, its surface spotless. And for a moment, just a moment, he thought he saw something move inside the glass. Then the phone on the floor vibrated. A single notification blinked on the screen. New friend request from Caspian Owen.